Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. I appreciate all of you being here this early in the morning to do news politics. As I often say, you can be anywhere, so the fact that you are here makes my heart swell like the Grinch in Christmas 20-fold. There we are. Sorry for the late start. The fire alarm is going off. I have no idea why. It went off at like 5 o'clock this morning. It went off again just recently. So apologize for the late start. On the positive side, my first guest, he wasn't able to get here till late anyway. So that worked out. God got involved, even though I don't necessarily like the fire alarm going off at weird times of the morning. Shout out to the audience before I kick off the show. We have Mecca Waltz, Swee Jin Yep. That's a new one. Lucy Waddell, I think she is a member. Jinho Choi, Deborah Wilson, shout out to all of you. Holly Holmes, Diane Thomas is in the house. Mama Thomas is here. Shout out to all of you. Skeptical Jerk apparently is also here. Good morning to all of you. The interesting news. Over the weekend. Oh, there's new news. So apparently Moscow is confirming a Putin-Trump phone call. This is the president. I'm just saying this, so forgive me for reading it on air. Russian President Vladimir Putin and his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump are scheduled to have a phone conversation on Tuesday. Dmitry Peskov has announced. So this is being confirmed by the Russian side at this point, saying, yes, they are going to have a phone call. That phone call is going to take place tomorrow. That's super interesting. There was also notes coming out of the White House that a peace deal is close. Now, as you know, Witkoff went to Moscow. There were talks. Eventually, there was confusion at first because it sounded like Donald Trump said that he had a phone conversation with Putin. Okay, it wasn't. He was talking about the conversation between the envoy and Putin. Fair enough. But now they're saying that Putin and Trump are going to actually have a phone call, and that phone call is going to take place on Tuesday. That is a good thing. The fact that the principals are talking, I would think is good, especially since a lot of good stuff is coming out of the White House saying we're going to get a deal, we're close to a deal, etc. As you remember, Donald Trump put out a 30-day, what I call a ceasefire trap. And again, as I pointed out, from my point of view, this is sides jockeying for position in some respects. That this is optics, this is theater, that the real conversation that's taking place behind the scenes is more along the lines of what territory are you going to give, no NATO or Ukraine neutrality, etc. Zelenskyy is not on board for this. Europe is not on board for this. So a lot of the theatrics that, for my take, that the Trump administration is taking is getting that horse to water, making that horse drink, because at the very end, there would need to be someone to sign a peace deal to say, yes, we surrender. It is hard to do that with Zelenskyy going rogue. With Trump saying, yes, there will be territorial concessions, Ukraine will be neutral, and you get Zelenskyy running out here. We need security guarantees. We are not giving up territory. We're not doing that. You can imagine it is very hard for an administration to unravel 3 years of rank war propaganda rivaling anything that you would have seen in Germany or, for that matter, UK during the Second World War. And to stop on a dime, and not just stop on a dime, but to also get them to sign on the dotted line. That takes a bit of work. And the work that you're seeing that Donald Trump is doing with 30-day ceasefire is the opening salvo to that work. Nobody believes that Putin was going to accept it. Putin didn't accept it. In fact, he graciously said, we're open to it. But yet, we have concerns. And then to work through those concerns, leaving an open door for Donald Trump in the context of any negotiation. So that is what was left on the table. Then Trump comes out and effectively acknowledges that there are troops trapped in Kursk that those troops are going to die and begs Putin to let them basically spare their lives. Please, sir, spare the lives of all of these troops that are trapped, stuck, can't get out of the Kursk region. Right? Please do that. Now, when this came out, it came out sounding like Trump spoke to Putin about this on the phone. It wasn't. He didn't speak to him on the phone. He was having a conversation about Witkoff and the Truth Social post. Here, this is what Trump was referring to. Putin comes back. I appreciate your offer. I appreciate you pleading for their lives. What we will do, we will spare their lives if they all surrender in mass. If a general order for surrender is given, we will take them into custody. They will be treated humanely, except the mercenaries, who will be treated as terrorists. But we're empathetic to your plea. We're empathetic to your plea. Just tell them to surrender, and this goes away. Now, keep in mind, Gerasimov pointed out that 67,000 Ukrainians have been destroyed. 67,000 in the Kursk region have been destroyed. Now, this is a mind-blowing loss, and it would be a psychological blow to the goofballs that thought this stupid escapade was a good idea in order to humiliate the Russians. Right here.
Беспилотных летательных аппаратов. Продвижение вдоль государственной границы десантников стрелковых.
He is speaking in Russian. You're not going to understand what he's saying, so fair enough. I'm not going to keep that clip. But he is effectively saying 67,000 Ukrainians have been killed. And the rest are encircled. So you have thousands that are encircled. You have thousands that are encircled. Trump knows it. Russia knows it. Kiev knows it. And yet, Kiev came out and said, we are continuing operations in Kursk. So when they're saying you can surrender and your lives will be spared, Kiev's like, nope, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. Because from their take, they came up with this idea of if we can hold on to the land, we can use it to negotiate. The problem they have is they are surrounded. They're cut off from their main base. They're cut off from any supplies, and they can't get out. Medvedev said they will be mercilessly killed. I think he said destroyed. They will methodically and mercilessly destroyed if they don't surrender. Well, they didn't take box number 1, so they're going to go through door number 2 to leave this physical matter reality plane of existence. They will be killed. They will be maneuvering into the afterlife at this point, if indeed they are not going to surrender. And Kiev, who wants Fortress Kursk, it's no longer Fortress Kursk because they have been surrounded. They have been routed. You've seen video after video of these people fleeing for their lives, just trying to get away, being shot down. Kiev decides no surrender, no general order for surrender. Those people are going to die. Those people are going to die. I want to bring in my guests. We are joined with the man himself. I deeply appreciate him joining me, Laith Marouf. Laith Marouf is an award-winning multimedia producer and media policy law consultant focused on issues of liberation and decolonialization from indigenous nations to Arab peoples and building broadcast capability for misrepresented and underrepresented communities around the world. Laith, welcome to the show, man. How you doing today? You doing all right?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much for having me again, Jamal.
No, man, always appreciate it. You put out a post, and I was fascinated by that post, and I want to get to that. But first, I have to get to 2 things. The attacks on Yemen and what is taking place in Syria right now in regards to what seems to be ethnic cleansing. From my understanding, Jelani's goons, his dogs, are going from house to house, killing minority communities with the idea of taking over property in those communities, especially in the coastal regions where there was the uprising. What is going on the ground?
Yeah, according to the Syrian Observatory of Human Rights, which is an imperialist organization that was covering Syria for the last 15 years, talking about the crimes of Assad government. So this is you know, a source of information that is not pro-resistance. And they are claiming that 10,000 Syrians were slaughtered over the last 3 weeks in the coast of Syria. So this is the imperialist, numbers. According to the numbers that we are getting, it's over 15,000 killed right now. So this is a higher death rate than even what happened in Gaza during the genocide. So remember, it's like almost 50,000 Palestinians in Gaza in 15 months. So clearly the numbers are wild in terms of the genocide in Syria. Right now maybe 100,000 have been displaced, much of them crossing into Lebanon. I was in the north of Lebanon over the last 2 days, documenting the arrival of Syrian refugees into the border villages in the north. There's Alawis, Christians, Shia, and even Sunni people crossing and running away. Because, by the way, this genocide is not only focusing on the minorities, Alawis, Shia, Druze, and Christian, which are receiving the bulk of the massacres and the crimes, but also this genocide is targeting the leadership of the Sunni sect in Syria. A reminder for our viewers, the majority of Muslim Sunnis in Syria belong to the Sufi mystic sect, close to 90% of them. There is no religious support to the Wahhabi cult or the Ikhwani Muslim Brotherhood movement. And therefore, we saw two very famous preachers in Syria that made messages critical of the genocide and targeting of the ethnic minorities or religious minorities that were lynched by HTS, and they were filmed as they were being tortured and lynched and eventually killed. And so there is a lot of the Sunni critical population that is also being targeted. There was a lot of also, we heard stories from these refugees, some of these families, Sunni families in the coast that hid their neighbors that are Christian and or Alawi or Shia, and they were also targeted, and members of their families killed and their homes burnt for daring to hide innocent civilians that are running away from this genocide.
And as this is taking place, this is effectively being whitewashed. I haven't seen this in Western media. It's been people who I follow who've been pointing this out, saying this is taking place and nobody, it's like it's just being completely whitewashed. Jelani comes out, says he's going to have an independent organization in order to investigate why there was an uprising as the killings continue to take place. That's astonishing to me. Is this being reported in any other, like, have you seen this reported in media outlets? Like, I'm astonished that this is, in fact, maybe I shouldn't be astonished, but this is being whitewashed. This is not being reported. This is something that is undercover and is only being reported by certain sources on the ground.
Yes, yes. I mean, the mainstream media that was covering Palestine and the genocide in Gaza correctly, mainly Al Jazeera, when we're talking about and its offshoots like Middle East Eye and so on, these are also simultaneously pro-HTS and pro-Wahhabi death squads. So where they could have done coverage that is unique and critical of Western outlets, actually they are not doing so, because Al Jazeera and all the offshoots of Al Jazeera are the official foreign policy of Qatar, and Qatar is a vassal of the United States. And Qatar was allowed over the last 3 decades to have Al Jazeera cover Palestine in a critical way or a pro-Palestinian way, in order on the Al Jazeera Arabic to be able to capture the Arabic audience, the 600 million Arabs around the world, and be able to manipulate them on other files that are important, and Palestine wouldn't be liberated without them, which is, let's say, how Al Jazeera manipulated the Arab population to support the Arab Autumn and the destruction of all the republics that escaped colonialism, Libya, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and so forth. And and now, as we see, to continue to manipulate the Arabic population towards sectarianism against the minorities in Syria and so on. And on the English side, it's very similar. Al Jazeera is allowed to be critical on the file of Palestine, but if you watch any of their coverage of any other issue on the planet, not only Arab issues, they coincide with the imperialist agenda, whether it's on Ukraine, on Venezuela, on South Africa, what have you. So it's you know, unfortunately, currently there is no major mainstream outlet that cannot be that is not associated with a state and or financial power centers of the imperialist coalition.
So what's the objective? To effectively, if we can kill everybody who's in the coastal regions, we can replace them with either Turks or other people that we like. We can destroy the ability for the coastal regions to uprise, for one. We can replace the local population with people who we want, who are in and part of our religion. So all of the minority communities, Sunnis, Alawites, all of these people can be gone, just gotten rid of, Christians, etc. Is that the plan? I mean, where they're systemically trying to reshape the material balance of people in various regions in order to prevent any future uprisings and to consolidate power in the country?
Yeah, I mean, look, they have 2 objectives, and those 2 objectives, which either of them they want, and both of them end with the same thing. One is either to force the minorities in Syria that are in certain geographic regions like the coast and or Sueda in the south to secede from Syria and beg for imperialist protection, foreign protection, and or to ethnically cleanse them. And in the end, both of those result in the same thing, which is the destruction of the uniqueness of Syria and the demographic change in what is the country. Of course, you did hint to the colonization by Turkic, Mongolic peoples in the coast right now that's happening. And for those who don't understand this, historically, obviously, you know, at the end, just before the beginning of World War I, when the Ottomans were fearing an Arab revolt, they began trying to build all these Turkish colonies in both Syria and Iraq that will extend from the Taurus Mountains, the traditional Turkish lands, go down all the way to Jerusalem or down all the way to Baghdad. And at the time, they managed to build a few of these colonies and populate them with Turkic peoples, but not many Turks wanted to move to them. And also World War I broke out, and that stopped this colonization process. You know, the Turks wanted to kind of find a way to guarantee their control of these parts of Syria and Iraq. And today we see a reemergence of that. And now we know from Tajik and Turkmen and Uzbek states government numbers that in the last few weeks, there's been at least 30, 40,000 families from these Central Asian countries that have been moved by the Turkish authorities into the coastal area and the north parts of Syria to try to do a demographic change. And this coincides, of course, with the Israelis in the first few weeks after the collapse of the Assad government, deliberately targeting all the civil registry offices across the country and the Foreign Affairs Ministry, meaning they burnt all the record of who is and who isn't a Syrian. And now, we're myself as a Syrian, if I'm not holding on to my family book, as they call it, and my passport and my ID cards and my kids' ID cards and so on, at any moment I could be told that I'm not Syrian, right? And all these Central Asian, Turkic, Mongolic peoples are being naturalized in Syria and becoming citizens, including Al-Jolani himself, who is a Saudi.
Wow, that is.
But I want to say one last thing here before we move on to Yemen. I'm sorry, I'm going to throw one more historical fact here. The Crusaders tried this to depopulate and change the population of the coast of Syria. If we look at right now, the borders of Lebanon and what is Palestine and the coastal area of Syria, they coincide with the Crusader principalities, right? And Syria lived this as a region, Greater Syria, the Fertile Crescent, lived this 1,000 years ago. The combined attack of the Mongolic hordes with the Crusader hordes, and the Mongols, in Iraq did what ISIS did, and the Crusaders in the coast of Syria did what the Zionists are doing right now. In fact, there's a record by the Crusader priests. They wrote what happened. When they entered the Crusaders, Ma'arrat al-Nu'man in Idlib, the town of Ma'arrat al-Nu'man, who surrendered without a fight to the Crusaders. The Crusaders conducted 3 days of cannibalism, ate them, everybody in Ma'arrat al-Nu'man. And when they entered Jerusalem, slaughtered everybody, including the Christian churches. And so this is not new to us in the region. And the new Mongolic hordes, ISIS and so forth, and the new Crusaders or Jusaders, if you want to call them, they cannot. The truth of the matter is they cannot achieve what wasn't achieved 1,000 years ago. Today they can't do what they couldn't. So the course of history, I know I'm saying all of this to leave some hope for people, so people don't get too depressed and or feel helpless in this situation. 1,000 years ago, the Crusaders couldn't change the reality on the ground here. They lasted 100 years and they had to leave. 1,000 years ago, the Mongol hordes that came and slaughtered and destroyed whole cities of Baghdad and Aleppo and so on, razed them to the ground, they ended up also leaving. And the story is repeating itself today.
Wow. Laith, I want to move over to the Houthis and the attack on Yemen that Donald Trump is effectively presiding over. Peace president, as he's often called. What is going on the ground? My understanding is there were multiple ships that were engaged in attacks. I couldn't tell whether or not the Houthis responded and attacked the U.S. ship. There were reports going both ways saying they did. There were other reports saying they were planning to. Give us some context of what's happening on the ground.
Yes. So this is another lesson in history. Yemen, thousands of years, was never occupied by a foreign power. And I'm talking about specifically the mountains of Yemen. Some of the coastal cities were occupied by the British and or the Romans and so forth. So the United States is again trying to achieve something here that hasn't been achieved by any power in history, which is a fool's errand, obviously. And so, Trump right now attacking Yemen on behalf of the Zionists because Yemen reactivated its, naval siege on shipping to the Zionist colony through the Red Sea. What is Trump going to achieve more with these bombings more than Biden attempted to achieve? Can he achieve anything more? No. Can aerial bombardments change the reality on the ground in Yemen? No. So this is obviously stupid of Trump to do. And Ansarullah and the Yemeni military also already announced that they responded by attacking the Eisenhower aircraft carrier. I think it's the Eisenhower or one of the other ones. I forget now the name of it. Point is, they used a wave of drones and ballistic missiles and guided missiles to attack the aircraft carrier group, not only the main aircraft carrier, but the destroyers around it. And a thing that we should note here is obviously these aircraft carrier groups stayed very far in the north of the Red Sea.
They're very vulnerable. Yeah.
Yeah. They didn't want to get closer to Yemen, make it even more vulnerable. And they needed, because of that, they needed resupply for their aircraft when they're coming back to land on the aircraft carrier. And the Saudis, the Qataris, and the Emiratis supposedly flew their air jet tankers to help these American and British jets refuel on their way back, which is now going to open the door for Yemen to target the Saudi, Emirati, and Qatari vassals. And I think one main problem for Arab liberation over the last 100 years is that all the battles for Arab liberation against colonialism and imperialism have been fought on the lands of the Arab republics that escaped colonialism, while the vassals in the Gulf that never saw any revolutionary movement succeeding after World War II, they continued, their oil, their gas continued to be extracted on the behalf of the British and the Americans, and actually paying for the subjugation of the rest of the Arabic people. And so in right now, in today's terms, if Yemen, if the axis of resistance wants to succeed, they have to target Saudi, Qatari, Emirati, Bahraini oil and gas facilities, okay, to make these vassals pay for subsidizing the imperialist war machine in our region, and to cut off the oil and gas supply and the money flow from these countries to the West. The Arabic oil and gas didn't serve one day over the last 80 years, didn't serve one Arab, and it shouldn't exist if it's not going to serve Arabs.
See, that's the rub, Laith. I get the sense that what they are trying to do is very specific. We want to stop the war. And so the entire point of this operation of we're targeting ships was to put pressure to stop the war. And to their credit, they put more pressure than any other government has put on anybody else in order to stop the war. I mean, much of the shipping in the Red Sea either ceased or was crippled because of what they were doing. And so I don't have the sense that it's a random going after everybody thing. I had the sense that we are trying to put pressure on all of these people to stop the conflict. And what's wild about it, there were reports that Donald Trump was working behind the scenes in order to reach out to Hamas, that back channel communications. Israel outed it. And the reporting was that Israel hated the fact that the US was trying to reach out and have direct conversations with Hamas because they didn't know if the US would come up with a deal that Israel didn't necessarily want or Israel didn't necessarily like, that they may be pushed into. When these were outed, apparently the guy that was trying to reach out was fired. Meaning Trump may have been serious about wanting to keep a ceasefire. At the same token, Donald Trump is also in the pocket of Israel and will blow one away if Netanyahu blows it away. But it seems like they were trying to do something to come up with a deal. My point is saying this, is that you stop the Houthis by getting a deal. You stop the Houthis by getting a deal. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong on this. That was my take on it, that the moment that you got a ceasefire, the firing in the middle of Red Sea stops. Or do you have a different take on this?
No, you're right. I mean, the Ansarullah are not bloodthirsty or war hungry
right.
Warmongers. And same thing, people in Lebanon, the resistance here or Iran. And this is what we saw over the last 16 months. It was the response of the axis of resistance was to target military only targets in the Zionist colony, to only target and limit the financial flow of products into Israel. There was no direct targeting of civilians, whether it's or civilian infrastructure in the Zionist colony, or American bases, or Saudi or Emirati flow of money that's and products through the route of supply from the Emirates through Saudi to Jordan to Israel. They didn't do that. Well, what I'm saying is that was a mistake, actually, because in the end, all of this restraint to win the public opinion of the Western populace, to show an alternative form of warfare that is not, butchering people for no reason,
right?
That didn't lead to the West listening to its own populations, that the vast majority of Europeans and Americans, Canadians, so on, are anti-genocide in Gaza. They're supportive of the Palestinian people. They don't want the spending of money on the Zionist colony and the military supplies and so forth. That's the vast majority of the populace. And that didn't change anything in the direction of these governments in the West. In fact, as we see right now, the official religion, the sacred, the dogma of Western capitals is Zionism. It's even more so right now, enforced as the official religion. So right now, in the next stage of this war, which is already beginning, the axis of resistance, if it wants to win this war, it has to abandon its quest to influence Western audiences, because it's irrelevant, the opinion of Western audiences. The Western populace are, for the most part, castrated. Okay, they're not going to fight for their own rights. I mean, look at the United States, as you know, Jamal. The American populace is not fighting to help give equity to its Black brothers and sisters, and or to do something for the indigenous nations, and or health care, or whatever it is. So why would the American populace revolt on behalf of Palestine? It's not going to happen. So it's done. It's done. You have to, right now, the axis of resistance has to militarily set the objectives of this war, and the number one thing to change the whole balance of situation in the region is to target the oil and gas facilities that are financing the Western economies, and to target American and Israeli air bases. That will change the whole course of the war. Anything else than that is just cosmetic.
I get the sense that what you're going to get is cosmetic. Then tell me if I'm wrong. I don't get this driving sense of conflict or of war that it sounds like you're saying. In Iran, it seems that Pezeshkian, yes, he's aligning himself with the Ayatollah, but he came out publicly saying that he wanted to make a deal with the West. And even though they're saying, yes, the flow of weapons are going to continue to the Houthis, or the flow of information, whatever that network is, I don't get the sense that Iran is chopping at the bit for a larger war. I get the sense that Hezbollah has been hurt or damaged, meaning I don't get the sense that these groups are pushing for a larger conflict or a way to expand the war. But correct me if I'm wrong. Do you see it? I mean, like I said, the Houthis thing is very limited. They're very specific. No, they're not getting credit for that in the West, to your point. Meaning that's not working. The optics of it is never going to go in their favor in the West and the way that it's looked at. I mean, hell, Caleb Maupin did a video on this, and his channel got demonetized just completely for the way he talked about it. Do you see that fervor for, let's say, heightened aggression, or to expand the conflict in a way that you would be seeing it? I don't see that.
Yeah, look, I mean, the imperialists and the Zionists are blood hungry, are more emboldened, and they will bring this war on Yemen and on Iran, whether they like it or not. So whether Bazakhshan wants to have a negotiation with the US or not, the US is going to bomb Iran on behalf of Israel, whether he does that or not.
Yeah.
Yemen will be attacked, and Abdul Malik al-Houthi is on the top target list, and they will try to assassinate him like they assassinated Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah and Ismail Haniya and al-Sinwar. So the Yemenis and the Iranians can wish as much as they want, but the Americans and the Israelis are going to take this the direction they want to take it. And therefore, a logical thing for the Iranians and the Yemenis to do is to preempt these things, not to wait till you're bombed and assassinated before you respond and then have to calculate. No, you have to. Right now, the only win that we saw, full win, was October 7th, 2023. Why? Because Hamas took the initiative and triggered military confrontation on its own terms, at its own time, at its own choosing, and took over 12 Israeli military bases, captured or killed 12 Israeli generals, and liberated lands that haven't been liberated since 1948. Yes, it was momentary. But you see what taking an initiative means? It means that you're not just sitting down and taking blows and then doing replies when your enemy is ready for your replies.
Yeah, they received no help. They received no help. The last thing before I let you go, Mahmoud Khalil. This conversation has fascinated me. And I need you to clarify for me. It puts me in mind of the conversation that takes place with Al Jazeera, where Al Jazeera gets credit for, okay, they're big on the issue of Gaza and Palestine. By the same token, when you look at the issue of Syria, oh my God, Jelani is a liberator. These are just Syrians, taking back in a civil war and getting rid of Assad. This is a great day, which for people like me is a bit jarring. It's like, wait a minute, how are you so heavy on the issue of Palestine? And then when you get to the issue of Syria, you don't stay consistent. Ideally, you stay consistent with this notion of, okay, well, you don't necessarily want these lands taken over by colonialists. Israel is a colonial state. You're pushing back against the colonial state in Gaza. When you get to Syria, everything is off the table. Jelani is great. Uyghurs and all of these other people, Uzbeks that are coming in, taking over, killing the minority population. They are liberators. And it felt like, and correct me if I'm wrong, that a similar thing was happening with Mahmoud Khalil, where in the US, people would say, oh my God, you're evicting this person because he takes a Palestinian viewpoint. But then, as you pointed out, there are other parts of his story that are weirder, that don't align with this idea of fighting back against colonial states. Go into this for me. I was fascinated by the article you sent from Free Palestine TV on this one. Explain it to us.
Yes, so Al Jazeera. Before I jump into Mahmoud Khalil, Al Jazeera is allowed to do this on Palestine and support the Palestinian liberation because it's against everybody else who supports the liberation of Palestine. So, Palestine and the Palestinians are besieged, and they can't liberate themselves or without external support. So you can preach as much as you want support for the Palestinians, as long as you, of course, work against everybody else who's trying to liberate them, like Syrian state at the time, or the resistance in Hezbollah and Ansarullah in Yemen and so on. So that is what is the imperialists in Washington allow Al Jazeera to do, knowing that it doesn't matter as much as it preaches for Palestine if it hates on everybody who really actively supports Palestine. Now,
by the way, I want to nail that down because that is a fascinating point. It's like, yeah, you can push for Palestine, but every other group that is pushing for Palestinian liberation, they're against. That's your point.
Yes. Yes. And therefore, it doesn't really matter their support for Palestine. It's not going to lead to the liberation of Palestine, all this media production. So this is what they're allowed by the masters in the White House. And they play the same role in their English network also. They undermine anything anybody like Russia or China or Venezuela or what have you, right? So, and especially since the collapse of BBC's credibility and CNN's credibility and so on, Al Jazeera English right now is really the main English television network that is imperialist and conducting a successful programs for the imperialist camp because of its support for Palestine. Okay, that keeps people going to watch it. Now, Mahmoud Khalil. Mahmoud Khalil was working for the United Kingdom Embassy in Beirut, Lebanon, and in charge of all of its Syria programs because the closure of the UK Embassy in Damascus after the beginnings of the war on Syria. And therefore, he was in charge of all the regime change operations. He had the highest security clearance on what was happening in Syria, and he was coordinating all the activities of the UK inside Syria. And he also, once he moved to the United States, was hired immediately by the biggest NGOs that are funded by, all the usual suspects, and these NGOs that were all made up after the quote-unquote Arab Spring, which I like to call the Arab Autumn, to fragment the Arabic and Muslim community in the United States that were all, before the Arab Autumn, were rallying behind Palestine during the second Intifada, and were fragmented or to deal with their own slaughter that's happening in their lands because of the Arab Autumn, whether it's Libya, Egypt, Tunis, Syria, blah, 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 and to split them up on sectarian lines because of the Syria file. And so he was hired by all these NGOs in the United States to create all these programs directed at the Arab and Muslim youth in the US to divert them away from true revolutionary anti-imperialist to this stupid Wahhabi, Ikhwani, made-up revolutions of the Arab Autumn. And finally, he was working, doing his graduate studies in Columbia University, and was handpicked by the administration to be their negotiator, to be the messenger between the students and the administration. So he wasn't part of the organizing of the encampments, and he had public statements, criticizing the Hindhole occupation, and therefore he was the accepted kitchen slave, house slave, and what we saw is that it's the government of the United States and the Zionists, who this man provided a lot of service for, conducted this public lynching of him. And clearly it has the effect of, frightening the field slaves, right? If master lynches the house slave, of course, all the field slaves are going to be scared. This is the point of what they did to him, and shows you how the limitation of collaborating with the Zionists or the white supremacists in general, in hopes that they give you some form of equity or accept you as something else. In the end, as a collaborator, when your usefulness ends, most of the time, the imperialists will use you throw you out as a used condom, or even set you on flames and rape you on television, like Muammar Gaddafi happened to Muammar Gaddafi when he handed over his weapons.
Yeah, he was sodomized with a machete. And Hillary Clinton, I never forget it. She was sitting there. She said, "We came, we saw, he died." Like, for her, this was a successful operation. And for everybody else, it's like, well, wait a minute. You've destroyed a country, not just destroyed a country. The country was rich many times over.
One last thing I would say about Mahmoud Khalil before we sign off here, and this is a big question that I don't have an answer for. If this man was an agent of MI6 and running their program to destabilize Syria here in the embassy in Beirut, what does it mean that Trump nabs an MI6 agent? Is there an actual, right now, war between the UK government and the United States? And remember, this is how world powers work with each other. On the same day as the nabbing of Mahmoud Khalil, there was the tanker carrying the jet fuel that got crashed on the shores of the UK and led to a shortage of jet fuel for all the American air bases in Europe. Okay, this is how world powers work without declaring things. Is this the UK's response to its colony, Canada, being threatened to be swallowed up by Trump? Did Trump do this to harm the ability of the UK to have any influence inside the United States? These are all big questions that I don't have answers for.
Interesting.
But this is how it works. And I think there's one last thing that we should say, and you will understand this as a Black American. It could be that this guy, of course, I support all his rights, Mahmoud Khalil, and the US shouldn't be having.
Yeah, this is outrageous that they're trying to deport him. He's legal here.
Yes, and doing this to him means that real radicals in the US could be treated even worse, right? If this is how they treat an MI6 agent that has a green card, that's married to an American, that has, a child on the way that's going to be a naturalized American, how are they going to treat the real radicals? But you, as another thing that we should point out here, and you would understand this, as I said, as a Black American, is that they killed Malcolm X, they killed Martin Luther King, but they jailed briefly Jesse Jackson, and Jesse Jackson got credibility from that. And then, of course, Jesse Jackson is a collaborator with the American institutions of colonialism and white supremacy. And so Mahmoud Khalil could be jailed briefly, and then he wins in court, and then he's out, and suddenly he has credibility to become the face of Arab and American, Muslim American.
So you're thinking they're doing this?
Yes, it could be that.
No, please finish. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it could be that they are creating a controlled opposition.
It could be that. Oh man, the Trump administration has been very aggressive on this issue of Israel, and they have been very vocal about using all of the powers in the White House to go after anybody that is critical of Israel and to deport those people if they have the ability to deport them. Rubio is using this ridiculous argument that he came in on a travel visa. Okay, well, dude, he's married to American, had a baby by an American citizen. He is naturalized as a green card citizen. The notion that you are evicting him using this nonsense of a travel visa is outrageous. So whatever he is, the premise that they're using is insane. I guess my thing is the Trump administration, even before they got in, has been very clear. We are going to deport anybody that has criticism of Israel if we have the ability to do so, and we're going to crack down on campuses. So you could be totally right, where they're using this to bolster his credibility for whatever he's doing in pursuit of the people who have paid him and the affiliations he's had. But it could also just be a hammer is a hammer, and Trump is looking at fulfilling his campaign promises. He's got $100 million from Israel, and any criticism is too much criticism. It could be either of those things. And by the way, it could work out exactly in the way that you're talking about, even if Trump is just, he said something, I want to get rid of him. It could be either.
Yes. There's, this is, look, all I'm trying to do here is to help people be a little bit more critical than just consuming the stories as they are. Because this story of Mahmoud Khalil has taken so much space right now in the Western alternative media that we're even not looking at. There's now tens of other students and professors in the US that are living the same reality that Mahmoud Khalil has lived.
Yes.
And even including some German white guy that is married to an American and has a green card and got deported in the airport. It's getting too ridiculous. But because of Mahmoud Khalil's story, it's taking too much space. We're not able to analyze these things in a wider systemic way. And that's all I'm trying to do with asking these questions.
I totally appreciate it. That's why I love having you here. You dig into the stuff in a way that gets more complexity to it. I'll say it that way. Laith, man, I always appreciate you joining me. The audience loves you. We had a good crowd today. Laith Maroof, he is an award-winning multimedia producer and media policy law consultant focused on issues of liberation and decolonialization from indigenous nations to Arab peoples and building broadcasting capabilities for misrepresented and underrepresented communities around the world. Laith, where can people find you so they can find your content and work?
Yes, you can go to our website, freepalestine.video, and from there follow all our social media. We're on YouTube, X, Insta, and tons of more other platforms. Please donate and join our social media. Follow us on all those platforms.
Laith, always appreciate you, man. Be safe. Have a good one, okay?
Good to be with you, Jamal. See you soon.
Thank you. All right. Always appreciate Laith coming on. He knows his stuff. He is on the ground in the area. I'm fascinated by this dynamic. So, in an American context, in the US, when we were looking out at these stories abroad, Al Jazeera is one of those main media organizations that is very heavy on the issue of Gaza. In fact, Al Jazeera had gotten so intense on the issue of Gaza and Palestine that if you remember when Blinken went to Qatar, Blinken is like, hey, you need to calm them down. Talking about the media organization, you need to calm them down. They're too aggressive on this issue. But as Laith pointed out, you would think that it is a one-to-one, that if you're saying, okay, Gaza is a colony and it needs to be, there needs to be another state, or there needs to be a solution to the genocide that's happening there. When you look at that issue and you say, okay, well, if Al Jazeera is focusing on that, then they would also have a similar take when you get to the attempted overthrow of the Syrian government under Obama. They don't. And it's a bit jarring, at least to an American. Whereas Laith points it out, it's like, look, they have different takes on these things. And part of the different takes has to do with their own political disposition in the world and what they want to see in the world. It's not entirely, oh my God, there's a genocide here, and oh my God, they're trying to overthrow the government. It's, oh my God, there's a genocide here, and hey, look at the liberators that are riding into Syria with Jelani as the leader of it, as opposed to look at the jihadists that are taking over and killing and murdering the civilian population because they want to be able to take it over. Those are different takes, but you would think that a person who looks at one has a take will look at the other one and also have to take of, hey, these guys are jihadists. It's not the way it works. It's not the way it works. It is very strange. I remember my producer was telling me this, and I was confused. Like, what do you mean? How are they having these different takes on issues that are very similar with one another? They do. That's Lake's point. He also makes this really good point of how are you against the groups that are fighting for Palestinian liberation, but you're for Palestinian liberation? How does that work? It is a fascinating topic. It is a fascinating topic. And bringing people on to elucidate it like Laith, I'm fortunate to have him come on and discuss it. So shout out to him for that. Even on stuff we disagree with, by the way, because there are a few topics that him and I would completely disagree with, especially on the Russian stuff. Oh, that is the most fascinating conversations. But I appreciate him for coming on, and I appreciate him having those talks and having these conversations with me about those issues. He lives in the area. I don't. Zelenskyy. Oh, by the way, Sabrina will be coming on shortly. She's coming on at 8:15. And interesting story coming out of CNN, just to preface it. The Democratic Party in polling is in the toilet. They're in the toilet. And I would point out to you, it's interviews like this. This is, oh, what is her name? She has been getting a lot of head play recently. But they say stuff like this and stuff like this just didn't work during the election. And yet they continue to say it, they continue to do it, they continue to take positions like this. So she's on a conversation, Jasmine Crockett, that's her name. That was one doing the yuck mouth, the dance with the yuck mouth, like it was coming out of a club. All right, so she's been getting a lot of airplay for whatever reason that I still don't quite understand, because I have not seen, she's not been my favorite. And by the way, I know none of her policies. It's just the presentation I haven't necessarily liked. But whatever. Do you, boo? Do your thing. So she is on Jake Tapper, CNN. Listen to this conversation, because I think part of the issue is stuff like this, as opposed to going back to schoolboy politics. Schoolboy politics. And I know she's a woman, but just look at the point. There are times when you go back to basics. There are times you go back to basics. There are times when you say, okay, I'm getting this wrong. I'm getting this fundamentally wrong. I am missing something in this process. Where did I go wrong? And you go back to a certain amount of basics. The moment that Superman has to go back to Smallville because, his life is too chaotic. There are moments in life where you say, we're getting it wrong. We've missed something. The boat has been missed. The horse is gone. There's something that we are getting incorrect. And go back to fundamentals in order to build your way back up into it. I'm saying that is where the Democratic Party needs to be. We need to go back to fundamentals because we are getting something fundamentally wrong. That's what they need to say. I am not hearing that. I am not hearing that. And the polling that has been coming out that has been pointing to, you are getting this wrong. The American public believes you're getting it wrong. Your own supporters believe you're getting it wrong. And they are like, we just need to wait. And they had overstepped. Meaning, from their point of view, there's nothing inherent to us. It's nothing that we have gotten fundamentally wrong. The public will eventually come back. And I'm saying that is the wrong approach. And I would wager to you that the majority of Democrats who are looking at them is thinking to themselves, this is the wrong approach. Leadership doesn't seem to think that. That's unfortunate. I want to bring in my guest before I get to the clip. We are joined, there she is. We're joined with Sabrina. I want to pull this down. I want to get your bio correct. So I'm going to read it as opposed to going by the top of my head. We're joined with Sabrina Savadi. She's a Boston-based activist, leftist, and podcaster. She's a member of Revolutionary Blackout Network, a Black-led multicultural network and co-op of everyday people, activists, and allies focusing on empowering communities through education, organization, and direct action. Sabrina, welcome to the show. You doing all right this morning? I know it's early.
Good morning, Jamal. I'm doing great.
So I want to go into a clip. So CNN, just to preface it, CNN came out with a new poll, and it is showing that the Democratic Party's favorability is at record lows, just 29%. So right here, Democratic Party's favorability rating among Americans stand at a record low. It says, with many in the party saying publicly that the leader should do more to stand up to President Trump, Democrats and Democratically aligned independents say 57% to 42% that Democrats should mainly work to stop the Republican agenda. Now, this is different than what it came out with before. We're right here. Democratic aligned adults say 52 to 48% that leadership of the Democratic Party is currently taking the party in the wrong direction. That is another shift from 8 years ago when views were largely positive. Here's another one. Among the American public overall, Democratic's favorability just stands at 29%, a record low in CNN polling dated back to 1992, and a drop of 20 points since 2021 when Trump first exited his first term. Okay, there are problems. There are problems. They don't seem to be accommodating those problems. And what I hear coming out of the leadership is not filling me with hope that they are getting the message, because they don't seem to get the message. And I think part of the problem is stuff like this. So Jasmine Crockett, who has been getting a lot of airplay recently, goes on Jake Tapper and says this. And I guess my feeling is what people want is for them to represent and stand for something. When Jon Stewart was having a conversation with Hakeem Jeffries, and Stewart gently points out, hey, Maybe you need to go back to the FDR era when you guys represented these real world items, Social Security, expansion of the government and state in regards to dealing with poverty and those type of issues. Maybe you need to represent something substantial. And are you moving to that? And Hakeem Jeffries was like, it's a messaging issue and people feel things, and we need to ensure that people feel things, completely missing the point, either intentionally or otherwise. I feel like this video is something similar. So this is Crockett on CNN.
You're close with Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York. Some of your fellow House Democrats say, and not just progressives, by the way, we've heard that moderates have said this too, that they're ready to support her to challenge Chuck Schumer in a Democratic primary. Would you get behind that?
That's 4 years from now. If you were asking me at least in 2 years, then I would have an absolute answer. But I can tell you that there are a lot of people that are watching his leadership in this moment. This is the moment. We don't even know what elections will look like in 4 years, if we will have elections. And so I definitely think that younger, fresher.
Now, understand the question was, should AOC challenge Chuck Schumer in the Senate? Because Chuck Schumer effectively led them down the cliff on this idea of shutting down the government. Then at the last minute, capitulated entirely. We get back, bends over, and bends over again. Complete capitulation. Many people in the House were pissed off at Chuck Schumer. And so the catch came up, okay, well, what if AOC challenges Chuck Schumer for the leadership position in 4 years when they have that position in the Senate? She didn't answer that. Instead, she said, well, I don't even know if we're going to have elections. It's like, okay, dude, you guys lost on that. Like, you went with this idea for 4 years that Donald Trump was going to end democracy, end American governance, all of that stuff. He tried to do it once, and you still lost on that issue. Give up the ghost. Do something else. That's my take. Oh, what is your thoughts on this? I think they're getting this wrong. I think they're playing this wrong, and I think the American public is right, saying the party is in shambles, and they are missing the boat in regards to real issues that the public would actually even care about. What are your thoughts?
I think that Jasmine Crockett and Hakeem Jeffries, who was also asked this question about Chuck Schumer, I think they got their marching orders, right? That they were told, like, if you are questioned about whether or not Chuck Schumer should step down or if he should be challenged, don't answer that question, right? So what they'll do is like they'll give a word salad answer. Now, Jasmine Crockett probably feels that AOC should probably do it, but even if she does, she's not going to say that. So they've already been directed as to which way to go on this particular issue. But what's interesting about that poll is that poll, if I remember correctly, was taken the week of March 6th, which was that was before this vote for the GOP spending bill. So I would argue that since that vote on the GOP spending bill where 10 Democrats decided to vote along with the GOP, I would argue that approval rating is probably lower than even the 29% after that, right? And also that same poll shows that the Republican Party doesn't have a strong approval rating either. I think there's like 39%. So both of these parties, the American people have kind of had it, right? So I think that what it does show is that people want something different. Now, are people going to vote that way? Because that's the question that I always bring up, because a lot of times people will say that they want a third party, they want more options, but when it comes time to vote, they continue to support the party that they are registered to. That's what most voters do, regardless of who the candidate is. So I think that some of this is on a Democrat leadership. Obviously, Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer, they're not there to actually fundamentally change your life. That's not what they're there for. They're there to answer to the donors in the donor class. Don't forget that Chuck Schumer also takes money from the Israeli lobby. So does Hakeem Jeffries. That's really who they're there to work for. Chuck Schumer right now is doing a book tour across the country to promote his book about anti-Semitism. So they're not there to help working class people. They're there to answer to the beck and call of what the donor class wants, what Wall Street wants. That's why they're there. And so I go back to the force the vote moment. And I know this is rehashing things, but the reason why so many people were pushing for them to force the vote against Nancy Pelosi for Medicare for all because it was during a pandemic, but also it could have been for any other progressive issue, right? Could have been $15 minimum wage during a pandemic, which would have made sense, right? The reason why so many of us were pushing for them to do that is because they had a narrow majority at that point in time, which if you follow the DSA handbook, it says this is what they are supposed to do when they have a narrow majority. Now they don't have a narrow majority. So now they can't do that. And now they're either stuck or they're going to resign. Most of them, I would say, are obviously not going to choose to resign. They're just going to go along with what Democrat leadership wants. Some of them may be vocal about it, but they're not going to risk losing their seat, especially after what they saw happen to Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman. So people really have to understand this. The politicians are not there to serve you, even though you're their constituents. They are there to serve the donor class, including the ones that are grassroots campaigns. They have to go along with Democrat leadership. If they don't, they'll lose their seat as well. So it's a party issue, but it's a bipartisan issue because both parties answer to Wall Street. So if people really want this to change, and I've said before, you really have to get corporate money out of electoral politics. We really need to have free elections in this country as they do in some other countries. But until that happens, I really don't see any changing of the Democratic Party.
Oh, you've gone in several fascinating directions, and all of them are tied together, and I want to hit it on it. Yes, corporate money out of elections. So 90% of the elections are won by the side with the most cash. That sucks because that is not even a political party at that point. That's just who gets the most money. 9 times out of 10, that person is going to win. So right after that, this whole idea that these are fighting ideas. Okay, that doesn't look that way if 90% is the number. The other part, ALC is fascinating to me on this issue. When ALC got elected, ALC was like, we got to primary some folks. Do you remember that when she first got in? We got to primary some folks. If I'm going to get my agenda accomplished, I need to get some of these dinosaurs out of office. And the Democratic Party said, okay, not only are you not going to do that, anybody that does that, we will effectively blackball them from the DSCC and the DCCC. So if you're going to do this, you are going to be blacklisted from the Democratic Party organs. All right. Now, this was only, though, for people like AOC that overturned the election of one of their main people that was in power. And so the group of the squad, as they got in, was somewhat neutered because the squad would have never been elected under that guise of blacklisting those votes. So right off the bat, when AOC first got in, she was in opposition on some level to the mainstay of the Democratic Party and freaked them out enough where they were put in a provision like that. This did not apply to other Democrats that were, let's say, part of the club. What's been fascinating to me was this changeover where AOC became part of the club and part of Mama Bear's circuit. When forced vote came up, if you remember, AOC was not on board for it. And she came out and said, look, we can push them on $15 an hour minimum wage. I think we'll be able to push Joe Biden on that. But force the vote is a no. People were saying bad things to me, which I agree, by the way. I thought the way that Dore and people like that were going after it was insane. But we can disagree on it. But her thing was like, we can do the $15 an hour minimum wage thing. Forward, didn't even get that. When Joe Biden initially came out, he says, these people are working minimum wage jobs. This is outrageous. We can't allow this level of poverty, especially during COVID. And the moment Joe Biden got in office, $15 an hour minimum wage went away. And everything that AOC up to that point was saying, oh, we can push Joe Biden on this, farcical. It became nonsense. So not only did you not show power when you had the opportunity to do so with a narrow majority, that narrow majority got crushed. And it became the point of like, okay, well, what's the point of the SWAT? You had political power to do something, and you didn't do anything. Even if you would have done with the force the vote option, it would have at the very least showed political power, that you had the ability to put out a demand and push leadership for it or crash their capability. Look, it's not about just having the ability to do something. It's also having the ability to stop somebody else from doing something. My ability to kill your legislative agenda means that I have some level of clout and power that I can use to get my agenda accomplished, even if I only have certain members in order to kill your thing. They didn't want to use it. They never want to use it. $50 an hour minimum wage. That was something she brought up. And when it came down to the legislation going back and forth between Democrats and Republicans, where Joe Manchin was saying, well, no, I don't want $15 an hour minimum wage. And you had the votes in the House to force it. Even then, they wouldn't do it. Like, give me your take on that. I said a lot there. I was trying to respond to you, but I'm fascinated with this changeover of AOC, where she starts off as this rebel and eventually gets bent to form to be part of the team. What do you disagree with me on anything I said in that?
Well, when she was first elected, she was protesting outside Nancy Pelosi's office. Does everyone remember that? Right. Mm-hmm. So that was before she had the talk, right? That was before Nancy Pelosi and other members of Dem leadership had a sit-down talk with her, which from what I understand has been happening with new Congress members. You're not going to change anything. You're not going to rock the boat. You're not going to come in here and have some type of, progressive takeover, which is what Justice Democrats was described as, like a hostile takeover of the Democratic Party. That's not going to happen here. So here's the thing. It's a mafia. This is why I continue to say it's a cult. If you don't get in line with it, then they'll oust you, right? They'll get rid of you. Go back to Dennis Kucinich when he was in Congress. Like, why? What did they do to Dennis Kucinich? Back then, Dennis Kucinich was the problem. He was the one they wanted to get rid of. They said, oh my God, this guy is too progressive. He's got to get out of here. So because they couldn't get him out of the seat by having, another person primary him and get him out, they redrew his district to get him out. It's a mafia. And I've been telling people, when you look at gang and gang activity and how gangs operate, that's exactly what this is. So I think what has happened with AOC is that, there was a talking to her. People have to understand that the squad was not supposed to be a thing. None of these people were supposed to be in Congress. They didn't have traditional campaigns. They had grassroots campaigns. They primaried, incumbents that were heavy hitters and had been there for a long time. That even Ayanna Pressley, when she ran, the guy that she ran against had been there for years. Yep. AOC ran against Jim Crowley. He had been there for years. Jamal Bowman ran against Elliot Engel. He had been there for years. None of these people were supposed to win those seats. Then once they won, Democrat leadership response is, oh my God, how are we going to deal with these guys? What were we going to do with them? We need to go ahead and give them the talk. So it's very clear to me that they were told to get in line or get out. Now, here's the thing. If you say that you don't care if you're a one-term congressperson, that shouldn't be an issue for you, which was exactly what AOC said. And I look back on Force the Vote. One of the things I've said before is I don't know if I would have taken the same approach that Jimmy took. Everybody has their own, decorum, but I don't know if I would have taken that same approach. But that's besides the point, because the thing is, you ran on it. They weren't asking other people who didn't run on Medicare for All to force the vote. They were asking people who ran on it to force the vote. They didn't even want to attend the town hall. They didn't even want to. And that's one example. I'll use another example. The marches for Medicare for All, which were in over 50 cities across the country 3 years ago. They didn't want any part of it. The only person who showed up to participate was Cori Bush. And from what I understand from my comrades who went to the DC march, she made it very clear that the squad was not happy with us having those marches. So these people are not serious. This is what I'm saying. We took people that were activists. Cori Bush was an activist. I don't know if I'll consider AOC an activist, but Cori Bush was someone who you think is going to get in there and fight. And what we have found is that, I don't know, maybe it's not a good idea to take an activist and put them into politics. Maybe it's better for activists to remain activists. I don't know, but they had several opportunities. Everyone keeps bringing up Force the Vote. There were the marches for Medicare for All. Even if they couldn't participate, they could have at least promoted it or tweeted about it or something on this issue that they heavily ran on and they supposedly support. They couldn't even do that. So they're not going to fight. And the only reason now AOC is speaking up and you see more of them speaking up is because Republicans are in power. People need to remember when Justice Democrats started, that was after Trump won. That wasn't during the Obama years. It wasn't after Biden won. It was after Republican won. So when they got into office, obviously they were very vocal, like we're going to impeach him. Rashida Tlaib said that. They sounded like they were going to be fighters, but they were talking about fighting against the Republicans. They weren't talking about fighting against the corporate establishment Democrats, which is what the assignment was. That's what Justice Democrats was. So now I'm hearing all these people on social media say, we need a left Tea Party. You had a left Tea Party. That's what the Justice Democrats was. Why all of a sudden people just don't remember? They don't remember this. They just totally just gone over their heads. You had a left Tea Party. That was Justice Democrats, and they failed the assignment.
I think it's very difficult for, I often say, if I was in political power, like let's say if I ran for office with my same idea of things now, how would that work? Okay, well, you need to get money. Okay, where are you getting the money from? And are the things that you want to push going to be paid for? Meaning, are people going to give me money if I'm trying to get Medicare for all? Or are people going to give money if I'm trying to increase the minimum wage? Especially if the people I'm trying to get money from are rich. They may believe that they need to work between the lines once they get into office. And I guess your point is, that's not why you were there. You were an activist that was pushing against a political party to get things accomplished. You got into the political party and then got bent into form like everybody else. Basically, you can't change the monolithic party space. That seems to be what that tells me with all of them. It is astonishing to me that people who ran on Medicare for all couldn't find it in themselves to back Medicare for all. And the reason I say that is Sanders was kind of the outgrowth of all of these groups, of Justice Democrats, of all of these Democrats and the funding model that they were running with, getting money from random people as opposed to getting money from the rich. That's how they got in office. That's how they were able to beat those other Democrats. I agree with you fully. The idea that they couldn't find it in themselves to support it is astonishing. And I guess the only thing that I can come up with is the party is saying, don't push it. Don't do it. We don't want you to push it. We don't want you to advocate for it. Gaza is another really good example where you have the mainstay of the party saying, this is a genocide. We don't like this. You have people like me, like yourself, and many others saying, this is a genocide. We don't like this. And they couldn't even be bothered to bring up a Palestinian on stage at the DNC convention. Kamala Harris's campaign effectively said, don't talk to these people who are pushing on the issue of Gaza. And so you have the party wanting something with the leadership completely saying, this is off the table for conversation. I would even go so far as to say people like Jordan Reed, when we were having this conversation, got fired for that issue. Because again, it's a criticism of the Democratic Party in the way that the party is effectively operating and policies that the policy has. They didn't want Medicare for all. Joe Biden even said it. If it passed Congress, I would veto it, which gives you the sense of where the political party is in relation to where other people, ideally, like the AOCs of the world were, or the Cora Bushes of the world were, in regards to this particular policy. Oh, like, why do you think it's that way? Like, do you think it's a monolithic organization that can't be changed? So even if you have activists that are raiding the party in the way of a Bernie Sanders way, and the way that he seems to think that can take place, that this is just a no-go. The party doesn't function that way. You can't change something that is not meant to be an instrument to do these things. Is that your thought? Like, what's your thinking on that transition from we're an activist and we want these things to we got to play between the lines?
I don't think people realize just how much big money controls electoral politics. And for example, this is why I don't believe the party is going to change. Even though you have some politicians in Congress that ran grassroots campaigns, the party itself and most of the politicians belong to big money interests. And I'll give a more recent example. You brought up Gaza, right? How many congressmen don't take money from AIPAC or J Street or some is Israeli lobby group? So that in itself is going to be a problem. I don't think people realize that nowadays, a lot of times these bills are written by lobby interest groups, not by the politicians. They control everything. And so that's why I say I don't believe that the party can change unless you got big money out of electoral politics. I just don't see that happening. That's why I advocate for people moving towards something else, right? Whether it's organizing, whether it's mutual aid, whether it's third parties, the system has to be broken. And there's different ways that you can do that. So when people say third parties aren't viable, that's not the only way that you can break the system. And I think if you look back at the history of the Black Panthers, you will see how they were able to break that system, how they were able to help people in their community without trying to do it through electoral politics or relying on the government. There are different ways to do that. The problem is a lot of people don't want to do that because that's not sexy. That's not attractive. Some people don't want to advocate for doing that because it doesn't get them clicks and views. That's just the reality, right? People would rather spend time talking about TYT every freaking day instead of organizing and getting people to do something else that's going to fundamentally change their communities. You have to start locally first. So that's one thing. The other thing I want to mention, the Bernie Sanders 2016 campaign told people what the problem was from the jump. What did Bernie Sanders tell you? The billionaires, the corruption, the oligarchy, the corporate elite. Right now, Bernie Sanders is doing this tour across the country against the oligarchy. And from what I understand, AOC is now joining him. But I call BS on that tour, because how are you calling out the oligarchy in the Republican Party, but you're not calling out the oligarchy in the Democratic Party, as if the Democratic Party doesn't take billionaire money too? They do, right? So that whole tour is to get people in those districts that Biden won and Kamala lost to come back to the Democratic Party. That's all that it is. That's just another sheepdogging tour to bring people back into the Democratic Party. The Bernie Sanders 2016 campaign had been done before. And this is something I think younger people may not be aware of. Jesse Jackson ran that campaign.
Yep.
The only difference is Jesse Jackson included reparations as a part of his campaign, unlike Bernie Sanders. But Jesse Jackson ran that same campaign. This is why I tell people there's nothing new. If you look back in history, a lot of times these things have already been done before. So the Bernie movement, it was basically a copycat of sorts of the Jesse Jackson presidential campaign. And a lot of people will tell you they thought that, Jesse Jackson was right back then. This has been done before, folks. So this is like since the 80s. People have been talking about this. People have been running on this. It is 2025. And people are still trying to tell you just to continue to go along with this process, right? Now it has gotten to the point where they're even willing to tell you, I know I said billionaire money is bad and Wall Street interest is bad, but vote for Kamala Harris because you don't want to get Donald Trump. Some of the same people who told you not to support corporate candidates are now fine telling you to support corporate candidates because they know this is done. So now they're moving on to the next thing that's going to make them money. And I sincerely hope more people wake up and see beyond this, because the reality is, while these people are getting rich off of this strategy, which is clearly not working, you are still struggling. The average middle-aged woman in this country works retail, a retail job, or is a waitress at a restaurant. The average American does not have a white-collar job. The average American doesn't have a college degree. And it is going to take something for those people. Those people are being ignored by both parties. And despite what people will tell you about right-wing populism and looking out for the working class, Trump doesn't look out for the working class. He didn't look out for the working class in 2016. I don't know where people are getting this from. All of a sudden, people just forgot. And you see, he's also Israel first. These people look out for billionaire interests, and that's it. They are not there to serve you. So what I have argued for is that there needs to be something for the working class. And right now, that is not the Republican Party, and that's not the Democratic Party.
Agreed. I suspect that those people went to Trump purely because they didn't think the Democratic Party was looking out for their interests. And no, he is not either. I don't know why they would think a billionaire is going to be looking out for middle class interests. I just don't understand the premise of it, whether it's Musk or, for that matter, whether it's Trump. But they have went to this idea that, well, we care about the economy. We're not getting anything out of Democrats. And so they migrate to Trump. And Democrats seem to believe, okay, when those people don't get what they want, they'll come back to us. We don't have to change anything. Like, meaning There's no happiness to be found anywhere. People are slashing back and forth. When they don't get one or what they want out of one, they go back to the other. Both political parties seem to have realized that, in which case both decide we don't have to change anything. Their parties aren't viable. Yeah, you go with Republicans for a while, but you come back to us after a while, and you're not going to get what you want from us either. That is, I guess, what's beyond Sanders? I don't know. I don't have an answer to that, by the way. I agree with everything that came out of your mouth just then. And I agree with your take on Sanders. This idea of him channeling all of this energy that he's going to get and channel it back into the Democratic Party, where, as I pointed out, they are not going to get what they want because the Democratic Party, they believe their issue is just purely messaging. That's not a substance issue. It's messaging. It's ethereal. We just need to explain to people something to get them to agree with us. We're doing everything just fine. What's beyond Sanders? I don't have an answer to that.
I sincerely think that people, and I hope no one takes this the wrong way, but I really do think the left needs to move on from Bernie Sanders. Okay, I even heard people saying this or showing this on X. They were saying that, oh, maybe he might run again. I'm like, are you guys serious? Like,
lost twice.
This is the same game that he's played over and over again. I honestly wonder, too, if they have something on Bernie Sanders, right? I wonder, you had all that energy around your movement and you are unwilling to take that movement and start something new. So I've often wondered, does the Democratic Party or does, I don't know, the higher ups, do they have something on Bernie Sanders? Is that why he's doing what he's doing? I don't know. But what I will say is that people have to move beyond Bernie Sanders and it's time to move forward to something new. And whether that is, again, organizing on the outside, I would call for a mass movement. My producer, Eric, created 11 demands. I would call for a mass movement around that. I think those demands are great, right? So organizing, mutual aid, which those of us at RBN do, and uplifting and helping to grow the third parties that you have. If you think there should be a new third party, then start a new third party. I'm not opposed to any of these things. And so I think that you are being naive if you think that the Democratic Party is going to give you some type of change.
Right.
They have consistently moved further and further right, not further and further left. In fact, both parties are against the left. So that is something to take into consideration if you think they're going to change. And the Democratic Party, because of the Trump years, they don't feel that they have to change. They just feel, we'll wait this out. Trump will be so bad that people will come back to us. People notice this back and forth since 2016. Mm-hmm. You've noticed none of these presidents since 2016 have been able to get reelected. Not Trump, not Joe Biden, or the Kamala coming in, whatever. Both of these parties have not had two presidential cycles in a row, which was different from what we saw before, right? Mm-hmm. And also, some of the blame goes back to Barack Obama. The reason how we were able to get a Donald Trump for president to begin with is because Barack Obama, who ran on hope and change, and also was talking about universal health care at that point, did not fulfill his campaign promises and continued to let down the working class. I still remember when he went to Flint, Michigan, and he pretended to drink the dirty water. Like, there's a number of things that we can point to under Barack Obama's presidency, where I would say it was his presidency that gave us a Donald Trump. And that's why a lot of people not even really feeling Obama like that anymore now. He can't even get people energized to come out and support the Democrat presidential candidate anymore like he used to be able to do. He was able to do that for Biden. That did not happen this time around. So I think people have had enough. So I think the Democratic Party, if they really want to win, they have to move to the left, not to the right. And they have to adopt a working class agenda. I would also say they need to have a Black agenda, because there's been an agenda for almost every other group, but they refuse to have an agenda specifically for Black Americans in this country. And I would also say those who are descendants of slavery in this country, they refuse to do it, but you can come up with an agenda for every other group. There are a number of things that need to happen. The Democratic Party also needs to accept the fact they continue to mention that the Latino vote, moved towards the Republican Party and that younger people were moving towards the Republican Party this time around. Black people stayed home.
Yes.
And they're not talking about this. Since Barack Obama's presidencies, the black vote has continued to decline in the Democratic Party. And that was even under Kamala Harris. And they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to bring up that number. And that should give people alarms. A lot of black people that I know stayed home. They are tired of coming out to vote and stand in line for hours for these people who are not going to do anything for the community. So at this point, they just feel as though it's not worth it. What the Democratic Party is also doing wrong is blaming the voters. You should never blame the voters for not coming out to support your candidate. It is on the candidate to convince the voters that they are actually going to help improve their lives. Kamala Harris didn't do that. And I think we can go back to a number of interviews that she had where she made it very clear that she wouldn't be any different from Joe Biden, right? Now it's being reported that a leaked conversation has come out via The Hill that Joe Biden told her when he handed it over to her not to have any daylight between himself and her, that she was not to distance herself. Now, we can point fingers at Joe Biden all we want to. I would just typically say Joe Biden is an asshole, but that's not a surprise to a lot of you, right? But it is on Kamala Harris to push back and say no. It is on Kamala Harris to have her own agenda and her own platform and not cave to what Biden wanted to protect his legacy. There is no point in breaking a glass ceiling if you were just going to do the beck and call of the people who were right there who came before you. So you ain't really break no ceiling. You fitting just right in. Something to think about.
God, I love that. So two things. No daylight, kid. It's what he told her. No daylight, kid. Oh, I love that line. I love that line. That line is iconic for how bad it is, right? There is a level of intimacy to the line, but it's fake intimacy. It's like, you're my buddy, you're my friend, but you're not really friends. She's your VP, and your VP needs to actually run in a race. And you're so concerned about your own legacy, the way people see you, you're so insecure about it, that you're effectively chaining her to policies that people didn't like. Meaning Joe Biden was losing the race because people didn't like Joe Biden. And the idea that you're telling her, don't deviate from me at all, don't break away from me, we're going to defend my legacy, et cetera, as opposed to her going out and win the race. Okay, your priorities are missing. Your priorities are wrong in this. You're supposed to win first. How Joe Biden feels about it matters less. I agree with you. Joe Biden is an asshole. So fair enough. I also agree with you with Sanders stuff. I agree. I guess my thing is Sanders didn't run on the issue of reparations. He didn't feel the need to run on it. And I got to be honest with you. I don't like that the Democratic Party breaks people up in the way that they do. Meaning, I don't like where they say, okay, you're Hispanic. Or they used, or what did they use? The word that Latinos hate. They still use, nevertheless.
Latinx?
Latinx, that no Latino uses, right? And they still try to force it on them. Why don't you want to be called Latinx? Dude, I'm Hispanic. Why are you calling me Latinx? Breaking them up in Latinx or Hispanic, Black, you're Native American, you're white, you're gay, I hate that. Because I don't think that's the way people look at America. Nor do I think that's the way people should look at America. Yeah, we all have our identity. But I think they lean on identity because they don't want to deal with the economic issues. So yeah, I'm going to say you're Black and I'm going to deal with DEI and I'm going to talk about these Black issues. But no, I'm not really doing anything for the thing that you actually care about, which is your economic reality. Because whether you're Black, white, gay, straight, anything in between, you got a house note, got to pay for a kid, you got to pay for things. And so we're going to lean on identity because people want to defend their identity, and we can use this as a political widget in order to get people to back us, not because we're doing anything for their economic realities, but because we're seeing them, they're seeing. I hate that. It's so manipulative. I would prefer an economic agenda that would hit the entirety of the working class. Meaning, if I say Medicare for all, that's affecting people who are on the lower end of the economic scale that just so happen to be Black, just so happen to be Hispanic, just so happen to be poor whites. That gets all of them. If I say $15 an hour minimum wage or whatever the minimum wage increase, that hits all of them. as opposed to having to break and divvy these people up. Give me your take on that, because you may disagree with that. But what are your thoughts?
Well, reparations is an economic agenda, though. See, I think people have to stop saying that reparations is based on race. It's not based on race. It's based on status. For those who were American descendants of slavery. So it's not, reparations is not for people who are Black. It's for people who are American descendants of slavery. That's very important for people to understand, because that can be overturned by the 14th Amendment. You can't say I'm giving someone reparations because they're Black. So you can't, no, it's just like when the United States government gave reparations to those who were Japanese Americans that were part of the internment camps and their descendants, right? So they were able to do that because that was a status at that point in time. It's the same thing if you even look now, even today, the U.S. government still, there have been different opportunities, especially under Barack Obama's presidency, where there have been reparations that have been given towards Holocaust survivors. Again, right. You can say that is a status. So I think people do need to understand that if you're doing that for those other groups where a debt was owed, then you also owe that debt to the descendants of slavery as well. So you can't say,
I agree with you. And maybe I should say it differently.
But the point that I wanted to say about the economics, what people have to understand is that if reparations, which is a debt that is owed, were paid to American descendants of slavery, that actually would help everybody economically in the country, because that money is going to go right back into the economy, right? Think about it this way. Black people who, again, a lot of us don't have any generational wealth, would now be able to buy homes. That's going to benefit the real estate market, right? More people will be able to go to college if they wanted to, and can't right now because of student loans. And I know a lot of people do not want to take on student loan debt. And I understand that from experience. Like, that would go back into the economy and benefit the economy. I also think there's a difference between equality and equity. Now, I agreed with Bernie's platform. I supported Bernie Sanders, but even back then, I still said reparations is a debt that is owed. That should be a part of your platform, especially since Bernie struggled with older Black voters, especially those that I talked to as well. They just were not convinced that he really had like a Black agenda. We could argue that Joe Biden didn't either, but he got a pass because he was Barack Obama's vice president. So there's a whole thing that goes into this. But Bernie Sanders' platform, the universal policies, that is equality. Now, everybody will have health care, right? Everybody will have free pre-K, that kind of stuff. I still support that and support those policies. But that doesn't give you equity. If you look at where we are in this country when it comes to wealth, Black people are still at the bottom. So when we implement those universal policies, yes, we'll all be equal because we'll all have those policies, but we'll still be at the bottom. So the equity piece is still missing right now. And I've been tracking this for quite some time. If you look at wealth in this country, white people aren't even at the top anymore. Right now, it's Asian Americans and Black people. Like, people say, well, no, the Latino community is no, we are at the bottom, and we've consistently stayed at the bottom. So I think that's my push. Like for that, I think that along with equality, you do have to have equity.
I agree with you. 1,000%. It's a debt that's owed. It's not a giveaway. It's like you had these people working effectively for free, putting them through horrendous conditions, and it was done by the U.S. government. It wasn't like a vampire. Like I often hear the argument, well, I wasn't alive back then. Okay, dude, nobody is looking at a vampire that's been alive for 400 years. What they're talking about is the U.S. government took on certain policies, and those policies had certain effects in regards to all of these people effectively being forcible to work. Okay, well, they should be compensated for that. You have my 1,000% agreement. I just don't know how to do it politically. It's a political thicket. And it's like, okay, if I'm stuck with a political thicket versus universal policies that is going to benefit my family or everybody else's family in the country, I will take it. But I agree with everything that came out of your mouth. Like, meaning I fully agree with what you said on this. There's a difference between equity and equality. And one is trying to get a certain equity into the country of African Americans, that money will be dumped immediately into the economy. 1,000% agree. 1,000% agree.
And people have to understand, one of the reasons why you'll hear them advocate for some of the other groups is because oftentimes it may not cost money, right? So when the Democratic Party advocates for, we have to have rights for LGBTQ community, which I support, that doesn't cost money.
Right.
People need,
bolsters identity.
Pay attention to.
No, I'm sorry. Oh, you're saying that's something people need to pay attention to. Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah.
Basically raising those issues as opposed to dealing with economic realities. No,
Yeah.
1,000% agree. Sabrina, I have deeply appreciated this conversation. I believe I really have. I think there's something fundamentally wrong with our political system. And, I would have people like Daniel Lazar on, and Daniel Lazar is a critic of the U.S. Constitution. He takes it to the Constitution. I think he's right on some level, but I think it goes further into the way that we fund our campaigns, that these people are effectively caught based on cash, and trying to change it on some level seems to have been a fool's errand. I don't quite know how to do it. So I appreciate your commentary on it. Sabrina Salvati. Am I pronouncing that last name correct, by the way?
You are. Not many do.
I nailed it. I was notorious for killing people's names on the show. Sabrina Salvati. She's a Boston-based activist, leftist, and podcaster. She's a member of the Revolutionary Blackout Network, a Black-led multicultural network and co-op of everyday people, activists, and allies focused on empowering communities through education, organization, and direct action. Sabrina, where can people find you, by the way? Your show is fantastic, by the way. My mom even watches every now and then. Where can people find you?
Yeah, you guys can find me on YouTube. My channel is Sabby Sabs, and you can also catch me on Revolutionary Blackout Network with my co-host JB. We host the JB and Sabby show.
Very cool. Thank you for this. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks, Jamal.
Have a good one. She is fantastic, and her show is awesome. Her show is awesome. Check her out on YouTube. Check her out on Twitter. I see her pop up, I believe, at 8 o'clock. I didn't get the time. I should have gotten the time from her. She has a great show. She has a great show. What you heard here is a really good example of her take. And it's a really good take. I can't necessarily say I disagree with the take. She's right about reparations. I just don't know how you do it politically. She's right about the equity versus equality argument. To put this in context, the last poll that I've seen, or the last study or report on the issue of wealth distribution that I've seen, it was something like blacks had 14,000 of wealth, whites had like 150. And it's like, whoa, that number is so drastic, right? And I guess for my take, the number is so drastic that there are people who are hurting in this country and passing those policies about, Medicare for all, expansion of Social Security, increased minimum wage. Those things would directly hit the people at the bottom. And so, no, it's not equity, but at the very least, it is allowing them access to things that just should be part of the human experience. But I see my guests peeping below. I want to bring them in. We are joined with Jeremy Kuzmarov. He is managing editor for Covert Action Magazine and author of several books on U.S. foreign policy. Jeremy, my man, how you doing today? You doing all right this morning?
I'm doing great, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you. Better that you're joining me. I want to go to Ukraine for a bit. There have been fascinating developments that have been taking place. For one, it has been reported this morning that Putin and Trump have a call set up for Tuesday. So there's that. There was a bit of weirdness on whether or not they had talked before on the issue of Kursk, but apparently it was Witkoff that was apparently talking to Putin, that Donald Trump was effectively saying, I called on him or we talked. Okay. Also, you had the events in Kursk. So General Gerasimov comes out and says the following. I know I pulled this clip. Where's this clip? Okay, maybe I did not pull the clip. Damn it, I thought I pulled the clip. Oh, I did pull the clip right here. So this is him giving a presentation, effectively saying, look, we've killed 67,000 troops, Ukrainian forces in Kursk, and the rest are surrounded.
Commander-in-Chief, the North Group is continuing to destroy the enemy in the Kursk region. We liberated more than 1,100,000 square meters of our territory. It's about 86% of the territory captured by the enemy. During this time, our enemy lost more than 67,000 servicemen. These are the highly motivated, highly trained troops the Ukrainian army.
За это время, товарищ Верховный Главнокомандующий, подразделение группировки
Commander-in-Chief,
продолжает операцию по уничтожению
the North Group
территории Курской области.
is continuing to destroy the enemy in the Kursk.
That term, destroy the enemy. There's something wild about that term. I'm not saying it's okay. It does sound a little bit funny to me. Destroy the enemy. We're destroying the enemy. Okay, we're killing all of these Ukrainian troops that are there. And apparently there are thousands that are surrounded in Kursk. Now, don't take my word for it. Reuters even reports it straight. Tens of thousands of Ukrainian troops are surrounded, encircled. They've lost contact with their command. They are there. And the ones that did try to leave got routed and were effectively gunned down. All right. So Trump comes out with a Truth Social post and is begging for the lives of these Ukrainians. I've never seen anything like it. Please spare their lives. This is going to be the worst disaster since the Second World War, etc. Right here, just so the audience can see it, not making it up. Please save their lives from Trump on Truth Social. Putin comes back and responds to this and says, look, I am empathetic to the lives of these people who are going to be lost in Kursk. I'm sympathetic to that. They need to surrender. If they surrender, they will be treated humanely. That is the only way out. Death or surrender. You're either going to be maneuvering into the afterlife, or you're going to maneuver into our ranks when we take you as POWs. There is no two ways about it. Now, Zelenskyy, and weirdly enough, Kiev is coming out saying, we are still continuing operations in Kursk, meaning the US side acknowledges they're surrounded. The Russian side acknowledges they're surrounded. Reuters even acknowledges they're surrounded. And they're still like, we're still staying. We're still doing maneuvers. Those people are going to die. Kiev has effectively refused Putin's surrender initiative. And Putin gave them a couple of days to even come to their own conclusions about whether or not they were going to give a general order to surrender. They have decided not to. What is going on with this? I'm fascinated by this because they've effectively said those people are just going to die.
Well, this, I mean, is continuity from the entire war. They've sent the Ukrainian into a meat grinder. You know, they waved. I mean, it was easy to get the population here, or gullible element of it, to wave Ukrainian flags and make how pro-Ukraine they were. But really, they're just sending young Ukrainian men and presumably some women to their death. And I mean, how many Ukrainians have died? And what have they got out of this? A lot of that billion in aid was stolen by Zelenskyy's cronies, and they've taken on the Russians. The Russians is a powerful military. They have a history of being able to mobilize their population in the face of foreign aggression. They see this as foreign aggression, and Ukraine has lost considerable territory, and their economy has been shattered. And they've lost a lot of their, youth, just like in the First World War. So this is, I mean, a fool's crusade, and Ukraine has been used in a pawn all along as part of the scheme, by Western countries to try and weaken and destabilize Russia. And what point will the Ukrainians revolt against their commanders? I mean, that's what you saw in Vietnam, where American soldiers said, enough, we're not going to fight a senseless war anymore. And they started revolting against their commanders. And ultimately, Nixon had to adopt the Vietnamization. But in this case, I mean, I'm just waiting for the Ukrainians to revolt, because it's been a fool's crusade for them, and they've been used, and they've been the ultimate losers in all this. And I mean, it's pathetic to see these liberals who claim to be for human rights and waving the Ukrainian flag, and they've sent all these people to their death. And this was totally avoidable. You had the Minsk agreement that would have worked out some kind of framework, but then Angela Merkel said, oh, we just signed that to buy time to arm Ukraine. I mean, they weren't serious about a peace settlement. And I mean, it was the West and U.S. that orchestrated the coup in 2014 that destabilized Ukraine and put in these hard right nationalists who are intent on taking on the Russians. Before that, Ukraine had a very peaceful relation with the Russians.
Yeah. Everything you just said is true. 1,000%. I'm fascinated by three strands that are happening at once. One, Trump moved to end the war. Now, I think a dance is being done with Trump and Putin in trying to get Europe and Ukraine, trying to drag that horse to water and make that horse drink, especially on the idea of peace terms. Now, Mark Rutte came to the US. He gets humiliated by Trump in the way that Trump is talking about Denmark and Greenland. But if you notice, when he goes back, he's like, yeah, NATO is off the table. And more to the point, we need to restart diplomatic relations with Russia. Okay, this is pretty astonishing. Since 30, 40 days earlier, you were screaming that we're going to be fighting the Russians forever. He's been bent into shape. Witkoff comes back and says this on CNN. Again, they're not talking about something going on for months. They're saying, we believe we can reach a deal within weeks. This is Witkoff. Again, rather astonishing.
President Putin, I think the meeting was somewhere between 3 and 4 hours. It was positive. We discussed, it was a solution-based discussion, and that's how I would describe it. I met with...
So they're saying that, look, we believe we can get a peace deal. We believe we can reach terms, that this is not something that is going to drag. We believe we can get a deal. We believe that Putin agrees on the main tenets of a deal. And I guess the issue becomes, okay, what is that deal going to look like? They believe they can get a deal that is just not a surrender. I think it's going to be a surrender, but other stuff added into it because there are other negotiations that are taking place over top of the issue of Ukraine. I like Witkoff, believe it or not. He seems to be a straight shooter. When he was talking to Israel, I like the fact that he, had no F's to give in regards to that conversation. But I get the sense that they are having a different conversation than what they are giving to the world. I think they're trying to solve it. And they're coming up with, okay, what are the terms to solve it? And ultimately, Ukraine and Europe are going to be presented with a deal, not that they're negotiating a deal, if that makes sense. Give me your take on this and what Witkoff is saying, because I want to go to Europe, because Europe is trying to be a fly in the ointment with Starmer and Macron trying to come up with troops to go into Ukraine after any sort of ceasefire that's taken place, which is a non-starter and would end any negotiation, any idea of a ceasefire. Meaning they're trying to be a fly in the ointment to any deal that Donald Trump is coming up with. Give me your take.
Yeah, it is a bit puzzling, yeah, and observing this, it's puzzling these Europeans, how gung-ho and zealous they are about trying to continue this war, and what have they gotten out of it? I mean, it's really been bad war for Europe. It's been a costly war. The destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline was very bad for Europe. It forced up energy prices. Russia is a potentially, very good trading partner for these countries. The Putin government was not initially very hostile to Europe. I mean, he was more in the pro-West wing of his party. So, it's really puzzling to see. The European kind of leaders have lost their head. And I
Yes.
think a lot of these leaders really lack legitimacy among their own population. And that's why we're seeing a lot of anger in the United States and in Europe with regard to political leadership. And unfortunately, the political right and far right is seizing on this moment. And it's the right wing, like it's the Trumps, it's the Orbans who are promoting more sensible policy with regard to Russia. And that's giving them a moral high ground among a considerable part of their population. And unfortunately, a lot of their other policies are very bad in other
Yes.
areas. In this area, I think they're much better. And that's one reason a lot of people did vote in Trump, because the Biden, in the United States, Biden was so Russophobic and such a gung-ho, zealous hawk that he was courting nuclear war. And it really scared a lot of people. And he was totally irrational in dealing with the Russians. Whereas we do see a much more sensible approach with Trump. Now, will Trump acquiesce to certain key Russian provisions? I hope so. In the past, he's adopted a fairly hard line, but times have changed, and the Trump administration may also want to set their sights on China. I mean, I think they see China the greater threat around the world. Its growing economy and with the Belt and Road Initiative, and the quest for mineral wealth. There was a report just issued by a think tank, Center for Strategic and International Studies, about this growing competition for minerals that's needed, to fuel the modern economy and
Yeah.
clean energy revolution. And China really has the upper hand, much more than Russia. China is very active in Africa, in certain key countries where there are minerals, and China is much stronger. So I think Trump sees China as a threat. He wants to end this and channel U.S. focus toward containing China. And if you can draw in Russia into more of a strategic alliance with the United States, that'll undermine the Russian-Chinese alliance that will, is really a threat to U.S. dominance of the world. So
Before moving over, okay, let me make the question more concise. What do you make of the moves that Donald Trump is making in regards to ending the war? I mean, I've had guests come on the show that says they don't believe that a U.S. president can acquiesce to the demands of Russia on this issue. I agree with you, though. I think Trump doesn't care about this issue. I think for him, as you pointed out, China is a bigger issue than this. And he would, all things being equal, rather have diplomatic relations with Russia. He doesn't believe it's in the U.S. interest to continue down this particular path. Give me your take on this, though. Witkoff going to Russia, the conversation that he's going to have with Putin tomorrow. What do you think that conversation is about? And what do you think that conversation is effectively trying to affect?
Well, one other thing to be wary of is that if they're not sincere, I mean, yeah, Russia is about to, take over the Kursk, and now would be a very opportune time for the Ukrainians to have a ceasefire and to try and build up their military to mount some
Yes.
kind of defense. So you have to be wary about that. But on the other hand, I think, yeah, like what you're saying, that the Trump administration wants to move on, maybe end this. I mean, his base certainly wants to end this. A
Yes.
lot of the public see this as a wasteful war. A lot has come out about the corruption. Even this Jack Teixeira, was just in the news. He was denouncing it as a corrupt boondoggle. So more and more of this has come to public light. Whistleblowers. So I mean, the public, I think, and leaders are responsive to always to the public, even more authoritarian states. But so I think I hope Trump is sincere about wanting to end it. Time will tell, though, about that, because don't forget the U.S. government in general. The neocons who still dominate the landscape. I mean, they have this long design to kind of bleed the Russians in Ukraine and keep imposing these sanctions that will inhibit the growth of their economy and keep them weak so they can dominate Eurasia, which is rich in oil and gas and which they really place high value on. So I don't know if they're going to totally give that up.
But
On
that
the
has
other hand,
failed.
I think they are switching to China as their focus. So
But hasn't that failed? Which is Trump's point. Like, I don't, it's not that I think Trump loves Russians. I think he looks at it and says that has failed. I mean, they made agreements and relationships with the larger part of the world. Russia has moved up into what, the fifth or fourth spot in the G7. And they don't even consider themselves, I'm sorry, the G8, if you include Russia, but they don't even consider themselves part of it. Their economy is in flames. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean it's hot and it's burning hot in a way that's creating inflation. Hasn't that failed? I mean, the dollar has only gotten weaker in the sense Europe has only gotten weaker, which is our main transatlantic ally. If the sanction regime was successful, those things wouldn't be true. Or am I wrong on this?
no, you're definitely not wrong. I just think some neocons still cling to this old policy. They're very rigid in their thinking, and I think they always see Russia as the enemy, and there's a certain Cold War mentality that's persistent, and you see that among the population has been conditioned in that way, and that's why the Russiagate
Phobia. Yeah.
propaganda and Russophobia was so effective. So it's hard to do away with that. And they're still thinking of, the glory days of the 80s when they bogged the Soviet Union down in Afghanistan and destroyed the Soviet Union. I think that's their model, Charlie Wilson's war. But
Yeah.
on the other hand, I think you have divisions in the ruling class. And I think that there are a lot of elements now around the Trump administration. And I know that this is the thinking of Eldridge Colby, who's very high now in the Pentagon, William Colby's grandson. That the U.S. can benefit. That the goal of U.S. foreign policy should be to weaken the Russian-China alliance, and that there are Russia is such a mineral a wealthy country as far as its mineral resources that the U.S. can cut some deals, and that the U.S. economy would really benefit from being able to either exploit those resources or engage in more commercial relation with the Russians. So they want to start to ease the sanctions and pry Russia more into the Western camp, and then undermine this Russia-China line. So I think that's the strategic thinking of some of the elements now prevalent in the Trump administration compared to the older neocons who's had a primary fixation with bleeding the Russians and have this Cold War mentality.
Yeah, agree. 1,000% agree with you. I want to move to Europe, and I want to bring them into the conversation. France and the UK have sent envoy, Macron and Starmer himself drag their bodies over to the US to beseech, to beg Donald Trump to give their a backstop of US force. Trump listened to them patiently. He seemed to, at the very least, get along okay with Macron, even though Macron didn't get what he wanted. Starmer was humiliated when Trump turns to them and says, "Hey, you can fight the Russians, right?" And everybody in the room laughed. Everybody in the room just laughed. They knew the answer was no, because he was here begging Trump to do so for him on his behalf. Europe is trying to start a third world war. And on top of that, trying to prevent any deal that takes place between Trump and Ukrainians, or I'm sorry, Trump and the Russians, which is the reason why Trump left them out of the conversation, right? They're not included in the talks. It's not Putin, Trump, and Starmer on the phone tomorrow. It's just Putin and Trump coming up with what the security architecture of Europe is going to be. Starmer has come out and is using now peace talk language for war in a third world war at that. Listen to what he's saying here. This is outrageous. And they know that this is dead on arrival, but they're putting this out there with the idea of, my take anyway, gumming up the works of any talk that takes place between Trump and Putin. Come on. Come on, Starmer. Okay, what is going on?
And we agreed to accelerate our practical work to support a potential deal. So we will now move into an operational phase. Our militaries will meet on Thursday this week here in the United Kingdom. And we agree.
This goofball is talking about putting troops on the ground in Ukraine after a ceasefire. Now, again, when we're talking about ceasefire, Putin is not accepting a 30-day ceasefire. What Putin is saying is any ceasefire that we go into should be talks to end the war. So no, we're not stopping our military campaigns. We're going to accomplish our military objectives. And we will talk to you as we are accomplishing our military objectives. And when we reach a framework of a deal, we will be interested in going through a process to end the war. So they're saying ceasefire, but they're talking about different things. This goofball is effectively talking about sending thousands, I think he said 10,000 troops with a coalition of the willing into Ukraine after a ceasefire is reached. Dead on arrival. And I guess my thing is, if Trump accepts this, then there could be no ceasefire, which is my point of saying they're trying to gum up the works of any agreement that takes place in order to end the war. Give me your take on this. Do you think this is going to come to pass, for when?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is kind of crazy talk, and also puzzling as to what will the European gain out of this? I mean, it's clear that Ukraine cannot win the war in any way, that they're losing, that the Russians are stronger militarily, Do they really want to take on the Russians? And is there will of the population? I mean, to really defeat the Russian, you need a total effort by these countries. And I'm not sure the population has the interest or will to do that. There's no real stake. I mean, all this talk about Putin going to invade, Western European countries. I mean, there's no evidence at all of that. It's just kind of red peril propaganda. So, again, I think these leaders have lost. Public, that they're just as overzealous on this issue, irrational, and they've lost a lot of credibility and public support. They discredited liberalism in general. I mean, this is not what liberalism stands for. This kind of bellicose foreign policy. I mean, that's what you would associate with fascists. Just starting wars, taking on the Russians. I mean, that's what Hitler did. So they discredited liberalism and they paved the way for the far right because the left is dead. So the far right, look at France. I mean, the far right has become in power with Jean-Marie Le Pen and his daughter.
Look at
And
Germany,
yeah,
Alternative for
so,
Deutschland. I mean, they were considered a Nazi party
yeah,
and nowhere near power. They're the number two party in Britain.
exactly.
I mean, in Germany today.
Yeah. So they're just discrediting liberalism, and it's paving the way toward the slide toward fascism in Europe. So it's horrible. I mean, it's just horrible. And I mean, yeah, if you study the historical pattern, when liberalism collapses, like in the Weimar Republic, you can get fascism, particularly if the economy goes into the tank. And I mean, the European economy not very strong right now.
No.
And the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline did not help that. The energy costs are way up. So, I mean, these leaders, this Russophobia has really harmed their own populations, and
Do
this
you think
anger will boil over. Yeah.
do you think they're pushing this hard because they're effectively trapped in their own narrative? Like you spend 3 years working with the US saying, hey, our economy is going to take a hit, but we're taking this hit for Ukraine. The Russians are going to take over everything. They're going to go rummaging through all of Europe. They're going to be on the English Channel. We must fight the Russians there so they don't necessarily get here. And then you have Root coming back saying, hey, we need to normalize diplomatic relations with Russia at some point when the war ends. You get Trump trying to resume diplomatic relations, removing, or at the very least saying we got to remove some sanctions. You have the banking sector that are trying to get back into Russia, like Visa, MasterCard. Apparently, they have a heads up on something that's coming. You have Witkoff saying that the war could be over with within a few weeks, meaning they could come up with a ceasefire proposal or deal within a few weeks, not months on end. Is it that these guys are just trapped in their narratives? That you went so far on that plank that you just can't walk it back? Like if they get a UN Security Council resolution, what is the UK and France going to do while screaming troops in the country with the US being against them doing so?
Well, yeah, I think you're right about that. Maybe they, yeah, made them. I mean, some of it may be just political. They've invested their horse in this, so they can't go back.
Yeah,
That's their issue that they staked a lot of their political career on, and it's kind of like Vietnam. If you study, or, read some of the history books, or even David Halberstam, The Best and the Brightest, was a good book, written right at the end of the Vietnam War, and it was just about the mentality of these elite policymakers and how they couldn't go back even after it was so clear that they were wrong. And
Yeah,
here you have these highly intelligent people, but they got caught up in it. They staked their political horse on it. And there's also this, I guess, I don't know what the term is, but this the environment they're in, you can't criticize. You're in like some kind of brotherhood and fraternity, and you can't go against the other person. So, but that's what leads to it. Yeah, I mean, I think we see that unfortunately in a lot of institutions is that people just are not willing to speak out against horrible policies, and they just conform to it. and there's no going back now. They have to double down and double down further, even though the writing is clearly on the wall. I mean, this is like a Vietnam. I think the goal was to induce the Russians Vietnam, like in
Yes.
Afghanistan, but this has really been another Vietnam for the West and for Ukraine, and it's a losing cause, and the writing is clear on the wall, but they can't see that reality, and they're taking a very dangerous course. I mean, Trump is, yeah, and this issue, because I mean, there are other thing we can discuss that Trump is doing that is very scary, dangerous, like with this arresting people for free speech
Agreed.
and the ICE deportation, taking that. But on this issue, I think he's has a more sensible approach. Well, we may have an ulterior motive in wanting to take on China, but it'll be good for everybody for this conflict to end. I mean, we've seen a threat of nuclear war here. We've seen the Ukraine. They're brazenly, increasingly attacking Russia. They're attacking Moscow with drones, destroying buildings, and we haven't seen this since the Second World War, where Moscow directly attacked. And that's just very dangerous. So a ceasefire and then a peace will, I think, be very good for humanity.
Speaking of writing on the wall, speaking of writing on the wall, Winston Churchill himself, Zelenskyy, has gone rogue. And whereas Trump and his team is like, look, we agree with Putin on most of the stuff. And so we believe we can get a deal. Zelenskyy is out here backing away from the ceasefire proposal. And in other videos, pointing out there will be no territorial concessions. He even went so far as to say there won't even be elections, something that Trump has been pushing for. So whereas Trump is saying one thing, Zelenskyy is out here going rogue. I'll play the clip.
As regards red lines, as the president of my country, I can tell you that me, myself, and the people of my country will never break constitution. They will always be defending our land, our lives. It's not easy to fight against an enemy like that, but this is our fight for independence. So we are not going to recognize any territories occupied by the Russian territory. This is for a fact. Our people were fighting for it. Our heroes fought for that. Wounded, killed, many of them. No one will forget about that. And when I say that no one will forget about that, I want to say that this is the most important red line. We will never let anyone forget about this crime against Ukraine.
Fight for independence. That's according to Zelenskyy. This is a fight for independence. And we are not giving up a territory. We're not going to acknowledge this. This is a red line for us. Okay, this is saying something different than what Trump is saying. Give me your thoughts.
Well, I mean, a fight for independence, but if you look at the backstory, I mean, there was a coup. Ukraine had very good relation with the Russians under Viktor Yanukovych. Then there was a U.S. and EU-backed coup, and that caused the whole problem. And it was Ukraine that attacked the people of Eastern Ukraine who had voted for their own autonomy, and gradually drew the Russians in, and they were committing horrendous human rights violations, shelling their cities, forcing people to live underground. And a lot of the Ukrainians didn't want to fight. That's why they had to use these militias that consisted of far right radicals. So, I mean, and then, there were a huge provocation directed against Russia constantly leading up to February 2022. And then, I mean, fight for independence, but they're losing. I mean, Ukraine is a tiny country. A fight for independence, but he's spending all his time begging foreign powers for weapons. What kind of fight for in the American Revolution did George Washington spend his time in Europe and Russia begging them for more and more weapons? Because they didn't have the wherewithal to fight the British on their own. But in that case, British directly occupied their country. Russia never occupied a country at all. They've just taken on a bigger country that they have no chance of winning. I mean, it's a fool's crusade, and they're all dying. I mean, you can call them heroes, but they're all dead. They're not serving their family or country by dying ultimately. So I mean, I feel sad for all those people and families. But I mean, they were used. They allowed themselves to be used as a pawn of the West and their designs of trying to weaken and destabilize Russia, and using Ukraine as a platform in that for that. And it's sad to see. You know, the West uses countries, and we've seen that in other wars. If you study other war, they'll use and manipulate people, whether it's the Kurds, the Hmong, in Laos. So these people ultimately don't benefit. You know, Henry Kissinger said it's worse to be a friend of the United States than an enemy, and we're
Yeah.
seeing that playing out in real terms. And I think Zelensky will be ultimately viewed as the worst leader in Ukrainian history. He sold his country out to foreign interests. I mean, he sold out a lot of Ukraine's. To fight for independence, why has he sold out Ukraine's economy to Wall Street? You know, I did an article that showed a lot of the land is being bought up by foreign interests and Wall Street banks, and that he's invited foreign corporations in to the extent that they're taking over Ukraine's economy, and there's a process of deindustrialization going on. So that's not a fight for independence when you're transforming your economy into that resembles more colonialism, where foreign powers, countries control it. And so, there's a film by Scott Ritter that showed his made a claim that he was an agent of the British, and it showed that when he went to Britain, he went right to the MI6 office and met with the director of MI6, and that's pretty odd. Ritter was pointing out. So, yeah, clearly this is a leader who sold his country out to foreign interests and doomed his people, and that's why I'm just waiting. Why will they continue going along with this and sending their youth to their death? There's going to be revolt in the Ukrainian army very soon. I think, unless they're just fooled, they just all want to die, because Russia could ultimately take over the whole country. I mean, they're
Want
not.
to.
They're going to lack the manpower at a certain
Yeah.
point.
I don't think they want to do that. Like, I think they had very specific military objectives that they want to accomplish.
Yeah.
And taking over all of Ukraine and ending up in a guerrilla war with West Ukraine is probably not something that they all that much want. I suspect they want a deal if they can get one. And look, I agree with you entirely. The idea that a country that was overthrown in 2014 is fighting for independence is astonishing to even say. Like, they lost their independence in 2014 when a band of goons backed by the US helped overthrow the democratically elected government of that country. And ever since, they have been a client state of either, like you say, US or British interests. I mean, Kursk is a really good example. Like, a British conceived project that Zelensky thought was fantastic, and that people like me was like, okay, this is a fool's errand. You people are going to die or get pushed out. You're not going to hold on to that land. And those people are going to die or get pushed out. And it doesn't seem like they have the ability to be pushed out at this point. So they're either going to die or surrender, one or the other. I think you're absolutely right. Like, it's like, this is not what independence looks like. This is something else. But he's going to argue the point. That is where he's going to stand. I guess my thing is, when you have the US effectively negotiating on behalf of Ukraine, which I think is going to take place tomorrow when Trump and Putin talk, they're going to talk about, okay, what does this look like? Zelensky, they've lost the war. And, he could say no territorial concessions all he wants. The conversation that is being had is, how do we get rid of Zelensky? Not necessarily with Putin and Trump, but that is a conversation that the US is having with various entities in Ukraine, where they are saying Zelensky is going to be out. They're going to find a way to kick him out, regardless of him saying, I'm staying. They're going to, no elections, that they are doing, and political coalitions are forming in Ukraine to find a way to get rid of Zelensky. Because at the end of the day, when the surrender document is presented, somebody in Ukraine with some level of legitimacy is going to have to sign it. And it's not going to be Zelensky. It's not going to be him. At least I don't think it is. What's your take on that?
Well, that just goes to show. Yeah, he says he's fighting for independence, but he's not even the one negotiating with Putin. It's these other powers
Right.
that really have the power to end the war. So that says it all about what we're saying.
Good point. Very good point. He's not the one that's negotiating. Trump and Putin are negotiating.
Yeah, I mean, he
They are going
doesn't
to come
even
up with a
matter.
deal.
He's the head of state of his country, and he doesn't even matter.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good point. Really good point. Super point. From your take on this, are you optimistic? I've asked everybody who covers this question because a lot of people, their heads are in a tailspin on this and how fast Trump is moving because he seems to really not care in comparison to the Biden years. Are you optimistic that this is going to be a deal and it's going to go through and it's going to be a lasting deal that resolves the security situation of Europe?
I wouldn't say so. I don't fully trust the Trump administration. I think
Nor should
they'll,
you.
I don't think, the U.S. has a history of promoting, peace agreements that would serve some kind of ulterior agenda. Are they really going to give Russia what it wants? Allow Russia to take over all this new territory? Demilitarize. I mean, I think Putin's goal has been to demilitarize Ukraine, no the NATO expansion in Ukraine. Now he's going to want to, have all that territory. Maybe he'll give some of it back, but I mean, I don't know. I think on one hand, yeah, I think it's possible. I mean, Putin not demanding too much, and if the U.S. goal is to pry Russia away from China, recalibrate U.S. diplomatic relations with Russia, I think they will agree to a lot of the Russian terms. On the other hand, there are these neoconservative elements and the Cold War mentality will still want to, screw over the Russians. I can't predict what will play out, but
Oh, you're
I
supposed
hope
to be
for
a
the best.
prognosticator. You're supposed
Yeah,
to
I'm
take
not
the
a good
risk.
prognosticator. Yeah.
Oh, you don't want to take the risk. I will take the risk. And I will say I think Trump is serious about trying to end it because I don't think he cares about it. I think he considers this to be Joe Biden's war.
Yeah.
The catch, and I guess the question becomes, is the US president capable of accepting the terms of the Russian president? I want to demilitarize Ukraine. They're not going to be part of NATO. This territory is now part of the Russian Federation. You will not go after the Russian language. Can he accept that? I mean, the fact that he's saying that Ukraine is going to have to give up territorial concessions on some level, at the very least, means that he accepts the fact that that territory is not going back to Ukraine. Now, to your point, how much of that land goes, if Putin is willing to give anything back, becomes part of the question. There will be no negotiations over Kursk. Russia has effectively liberated all of that territory. We'll see. We'll see. Jeremy, thank you, my man. By the way, and just to give the audience on the heads up of who you are, Jeremy is a managing editor of Covert Action Magazine and author of several books on U.S. foreign policy. Jeremy, where can people find you?
Well, yeah, you can find me at Covert Action Magazine, and also I have my own Substack, Too Hot for the Mainstream. So check me out there.
Too hot for mainstream. Hot damn.
Yeah.
Jeremy, my man, thank you for this. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Always great to be with you.
Absolutely. All right. I think Jeremy is right. I think many of the analysts have taken the position of being cautiously optimistic. It seems that Trump is moving in a particular direction, but Trump is going to dance and work between the lines to get to that point without necessarily looking bad or weak as an American president. That's what I tend to think. I don't know what it would look like for him to take a weak position or what seems to be a weak position in the war. So he's not going to do that. He's going to be a strong man as he goes about effectively surrendering to Russia in relation to Ukraine. That's what I think. I've seen more movements that Trump has made to unravel a lot of the stuff that has gone on. One of those movements, as you know, they were saying that Russia was stealing kids, where Trump has unraveled the investigations because those were political investigations associated with it. He's been talking about how to unravel sanctions. We'll see. They're going to have talks on Tuesday. We'll see the outcome of those talks and what they talked about. We'll be able to read the Russian readout and the American readout to see what they actually say. Mark Slobod is going to be on tomorrow, so that's fantastic. They might have even had the talks by then, and we'll see what Mark has to say about it. One piece before I close. Kyle Kalinske. This is not me putting a knife in Cal. But there was a conversation that they were having that I was fascinated by, because I think a lot of people will make the same criticism of me in my show. I am not a Democrat. So if I'm criticizing Democrats, then I'm criticizing a political party that I am not affiliated with. So I have no affiliation. I have no love for it. In fact, my ire against that party is astonishing. And if you ask me, I would say it goes beyond my ire for Republicans, because I have no expectation of Republicans. The guy who, the rando, that has no affiliation to me, that doesn't like me, I don't care. A family member, I may have feelings about, because it's a family member. Like, meaning somebody who you feel has a responsibility to you is going to be different, and how you perceive them are going to be different than somebody that has no responsibility to you at all. Kyle, I'm not going to say he's going after Jimmy Dore, but he is making a point about Jimmy Dore that may be fair, but I think kind of misses the point that Kyle is making. Let me explain. This is Kyle and his girlfriend, maybe even wife at this point, Crystal Ball. I like Crystal, no complaints, maybe a few, but I like Crystal Ball. Listen to the conversation that they're having and how they bring Dore into this particular conversation.
Yeah, so he does, like, he focuses quite a bit on just how cucked Trump is to Israel, which, to be fair, that's 100% true, but also his objection stems from legit anti-Semitism.
Yeah, he's got the right position for the wrong reasons.
For the wrong reason, exactly.
It's just a fucking shame, because Nick Fuentes is so talented. I'm like, you don't have to be. Funny. Yeah, it's like, you don't have to be a Nazi to be successful. Like, just don't be a Nazi. Just like actually have, like, if he had just actually had good politics, he still would have been wildly successful, because he's talented.
You know what he reminds me of? He's like the Jimmy Dore of the right, circa like 2018.
I had that same thought,
because he's like, I'm the purist, I'm the most right wing, I'm the most Nazi, and I'm going to criticize this administration from the pure Nazi position, right?
Yes.
But he's also entertaining, funny, right? And that was sort of like what Jimmy Dore was doing in 2018, where I'm holier than thou, purer than thou, and I'm going to rip the Democrats from the left.
Yeah.
But the thing is, now Jimmy Dore, he hyper focuses on Democrats and liberals and leftists and shits on them all the time and never shits on Republicans. It'll be interesting if that's what happens in reverse with Nick Fuentes, where he only shits on the Republicans and Trump nonstop and almost gives people the misimpression that he's somehow more on the left. You know what I'm saying?
Why does Dore do that? Isn't that the interesting question? Why does he do that? Why do I focus primarily on Democrats? Because I have no expectation of getting anything out of Republicans. Meaning the Republican Party has set their disposition to be, we don't necessarily believe in government. We want to get rid of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. We want to cut government services. That is who they are. That is who I recognize them to be. That is who they say they are, right? So what is the point of me going after a political party that is not in their ethos or disposition for Medicare for all, for increase the minimum wage, for et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? The Democratic Party for decades said, this is who we are. This is what we believe in. We believe in expanding healthcare. We believe in expanding minimum wage. We believe in civil rights for all of these groups. We believe in being anti-war in the way that they effectively call it. They have repudiated all of it. The fact that Sanders will run in a race and say, fair enough, I am the things that you people said that you are. And they do any and everything in their power to put a knife in Sanders, showing their difference and that they don't believe in those things. The reason they get criticized, the reason they get attacked remorselessly is because of that. If I am criticizing them for not being those things. Republicans never said they were. So if you're looking for a vehicle to get from point A to point B, one vehicle says, we believe in expansion of the minimum wage. Okay, great. That's a vehicle. We believe in increasing healthcare. Okay, so we went with the term Medicare for all. We believe in the expansion of Social Security and defense of Social Security. We believe in blah, 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 blah. All right, I'm only criticizing you for not being what you say you are. That is why that criticism goes against Democrats constantly. From my take, anyway, I have no expectation of Republicans. Democrats say that they are representative of the FDR class. And yet you put up Biden, Clinton, Obama. None of these people believe in these things and are pro-war. So there's that. So a party that claims to be on the left, who tends to deal with policies that the American public doesn't agree with, women or trans men in sports, transgender kids, surgeries for kids without telling the parents. And Democrats will say, well, wait a minute, we don't believe largely in these things, but I'm telling you, you put somebody on CNN who says the wrong pronoun and the person will lose their minds. That is not the way most Americans think. And they have used identity issues in lieu of economic populism, which is what the left wants. I hope you get my point. So if I'm on the left and you're telling me these woke policy stuff, but you're not expanding minimum wage, you're not increasing Social Security, you're not dealing with Medicare for all and the medical needs of the American population, you're not dealing with the economic realities that people are effectively dealing with, then you're using identity and things that people hold closely. And again, as a political tool, it works. Obviously, it works up to a point. But you're using those things in lieu of the economic lefty policies that made the New Deal what the New Deal was, made FDR this icon, and honestly allows Sanders the energy that he has to effectively and eventually dump that energy back into the Democratic Party. I'm saying they don't represent those things. So the fact that they say they are this, I have every right to criticize them for not being what they say they are. So does Dorr. And he was not wrong for doing so. He was absolutely correct in doing so. Every bit as much as he is now, every bit as much as I am now. Why? Yes, I criticize Republicans, but I'm criticizing them for doing horrible things that I think the American public would just disagree with. In that case, I'm making the argument to the American public that these people are out to lunch. When I'm criticizing the Democratic Party, I am doing something very similar. I focus that criticism more so on Democrats because they say they are something that they are fundamentally not. That's why you hit Democrats. That's why the Democratic Party should be hitting Democrats with every bit as much fervor as I am and every bit as much fervor as Jimmy Dore is. He was not wrong. He might have been over the top in some of the things he was saying about these people, but he was not wrong in his criticism back then, nor is he wrong in his criticism now. Nor do I take issue with anybody criticizing Republicans, by the way. They should. None of these political parties are representing the interests of the American worker or the American public. None of them are. So all of them should be getting over the top criticism as a basis of operation. But coming out from the standpoint of the left, well, that's where I come out of. So what is the point of me being in a political space where the only thing I do is criticize Republicans when I think part of the main issue is Democrats? The idea that Donald Trump wins the election is astonishing. Trump could have never won at one point. The only reason a Trump is even in the political space is for a failure of the other political space, meaning the brain trust that existed among Democrats and Republicans. Let's say the Bill Clinton era, or even the era before Bill Clinton, Jimmy Carter. Name any random political figure. Those political figures were very similar. Is there really a major difference between a Jeb Bush and a Hillary Clinton? Around the edges they are, but for the most part, very little difference between them. That's the reason why you can get a Liz Cheney go running around the country and liberals steal back the horse, despite the fact that they're using Liz Cheney. I'm saying that the typical political class that was there before Trump got in office collapsed. When you got Clinton running, the notion that Sanders, who calls himself a socialist, was able to catch fire to that degree shows that the wings or the main thrusts of the liberal order and the conservative order collapse. You don't get a Bernie Sanders if Bill Clinton is doing a great job, if the Gores of the world are doing a great job and the public sees them as such. You don't get a Donald Trump if the George Bushes of the world, the Jeb Bushes of the world, the John McCains of the world are doing a good job. The main center collapsed. The wings ran rapid. The only difference is you had institutions in the context of the Democratic Party that could put a knife in Sanders and stop him from taking the spot that he should have been able to take in a race with Trump and Sanders. Because again, the mainstay of the political spectrum collapsed. They were not serving the needs of the American public. The American public went looking for something else. On one side, they saw Sanders. On the other side, they saw Trump. Great. Let's have them run. See if they can do something different than the main political order that has been in Washington for the last 20, 30 years. Democrats cheat Sanders. He fails. Trump is able to exceed. Trump wins. It is correct to attack Democrats. It is correct to go after them for being what they say they are not, or for saying what they claim to be, to which they are not. Dora was correct. Dora was correct. All right. Before I close it, I'm going to go to the chat. All chats will be read, providing they're not racist, sexist, or bigoted. Sir Mike Salah today. Catherine Austin Pitts. Why is that name familiar to me? Catherine Austin Pitts. Why is that name familiar? Answer this question, why people vote the way they do. Her answer is they will vote for the winner on the Kunstler cast, $3.99. That name is super familiar to me, and I don't know why. I'm going to have to look it up. Sir Mike Salat. Thank you, Sir Mike Salat. We have another one, JX. No offense, I like you both, but no one needs you to waste a single second discussing the Democrats. We need you to tell us what to support, not what to not support. You should be discussing ACP. Fair enough. Fair enough. I take your critique. The only problem is that the Democratic Party is one of the main political parties in the US. And what they do or what they don't do has large effects on the population. And truth be told, I want them to be worth a damn. Like, my criticism is not just because I'm punching Democrats. It's because I ultimately need a political device, meaning whatever happens outside the political space, you still need a political device to get that to point A to point B. Meaning it's the same thing with Ukraine, right? Regardless of what you say about Zelenskyy, you need a legal entity to sign a document saying they surrender, to put an end to it. In the United States, you need a legal entity to pull whatever is coming out of the main American population in regards to what they want that party to be and what they want that party to do. When Jon Stewart is like, hey, I think you should support FDR policies, he's trying to say, you need to get back to basics. You need to represent and stand for something that people can get behind so you can accomplish political objectives, because those political objectives at some point need to be signed into law. I can't tell you what to support in this sense, because I don't really have an answer in real terms, which is the reason why I asked my guests. Should you support outside political movements? Yes, if those political movements are going to accomplish your objectives. Are there individual actors that you should support if they are indeed representing your interests? Then obviously, if they're representing your interests, have at it. But I'm stuck with the fact that this is a major political entity in the United States up until the point where it's no longer a major political entity. If there was a third party doing this, you would have me boosting that third party. If there was a political candidate doing it, you would have me boosting that political candidate. I don't see it. I don't know the way out. I don't see a magical door to get us out of the situation. The Democratic Party is in shambles. The American public deeply dislikes them and deeply dislikes many of the policies that they espouse. They are not an entity that is in any position to do anything politically. But it's not that the American public loves Republicans either. And I strongly suspect that there's going to be a backlash against what Trump is doing to public services, especially if it starts to bubble up into a larger thing. And there's, let's say, difficulties with those public services as a direct result of what Donald Trump is doing. I don't have an answer for that. I just don't. I feel like we're in a rebuilding phase in regards to what this country is going to want out of its political system. But we're not there. So I don't know. I do appreciate the comment, though. I would prefer not to talk Democrats. I don't like the political party. But one of the main things that I don't like is that this pretending that they are something that they're fundamentally not. And when you lose the working class and they vote for a billionaire, that should be a wake-up call. I don't see the wake-up call. So for my take, if you don't criticize them, how do they change? And how do they even given the chance to change if you're not criticizing the fact that there are problems with the political system and the political party? But I do appreciate your comment. I really do. And thank you for watching, by the way. Thank you for watching. JX, here we go again. We live in a rapidly collapsing empire, and you're discussing Sanders and Democrats. You are wasting precious time. No offense. I don't take offense to that at all. No offense. I don't know another way around it. But I take your criticism fairly and honestly. Globalist totalitarianism, Alexander G. Look, you can have an open country. You can have open society where people talk and everything else, providing you do not have conflict and providing everyone is on the same page. If all of us agree, then there is no wall, there is no line. The moment that one of us agrees, the line has been drawn, right? So you can have this talk about, we have an open government, we have open conversations, we have all of this stuff up until the point where you need to shut the public up about something that the public disagrees with. Oh my God, the public is criticizing us about Israel. Now we have to be a hard ass on this. Oh my God, they're pointing out that we overthrew the government of Ukraine. Okay, now we need to be a hard ass about this. We need to get rid of networks. We need to stop people from talking about this issue. You can have that open country, providing everybody's on the same page, and there is nothing that is pressing against the government that forces the government to come to drawing lines. So liberalism, okay, if they want to call it that. If they want to call it that. The totalitarian thing, yeah. Anytime a government gets into a situation where it wants to shut the public up, they will take on similar policies. All of this talk about we're a free society, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, those are your hopes. Those are your hopes. In practice, it tends to be different. In practice, it tends to be different. All right. We have come to the end. We've come to the end. Let me give a shout out to my audience before I close. Ali Sporin, socialism never took root in America because the poor see themselves not as exploited proletariat, but as a temporary embarrassed millionaires. John Steinbeck. And you want communism? Good luck. Well, I never really called for communism, but there may be people in the audience that have called for it. I don't know if it's that. I mean, yeah, on some level, yes. I suspect Europe took that tack a little bit more because they were right on the border and they were close to it, whereas America had an ocean across from it, and we took ourselves as the capitalist vanguard in that sense. Oh, we love globalism. We all love all of this stuff up until the point where it bites us in the ass, where China becomes a superpower in regards to industrial capacity. I don't know. I think an argument can be made for it. I mean, when you get people like Sanders running and making this argument for economic populism, even in right-wing sectors, they tend to agree because it's common sense in the sense of working class and the majority of the people in this country that are going to be working class. But yeah, it never took hold. It never took hold. And you had people who are fighting hard for it. Fighting hard for it. Christie's mommy, what is Jamal supposed to do? He's not a politician. No, I'm not a politician, but it takes critique. I think people are tired of Democrats. And I think the criticism on some level comes from that. If I was having a conversation with my mom today, and she was talking about Malik. And, Malik is on CNN. He's a Republican on CNN, and he's pushing for Republican stuff. And as I pointed out to her, look, if you're looking for him to come out with something other than that, you're going to be greatly disheartened. He is a Republican. His job is to be partisan. When he was on fault lines, I would argue that he was less partisan, even though he was still a Republican. And I think part of that was because for me, I'm not overtly partisan. I'm a lefty. The things that I want. But if it makes sense, then I am not overtly partisan in my take on it. If it makes sense, it makes sense. Even if it's coming out of the right, even if the right says something that they are right on. I was not front deranged. So I think, and I could be wrong, he was less put in a position where he felt he needed to be overtly partisan, even though he was still a Republican in the conversations that he was having on fault lines. Meaning, I didn't put him on edge. I'm not trying to take over Taiwan, so you don't need to defend Taiwan. I'm not trying to take over Ukraine, so you don't need to defend Ukraine. I'm an honest actor. If I think what you're saying is right, I'll say so. I don't have an issue with saying so. If I think what you're saying is wrong, I would say so. I don't have an issue in saying so. And so he's not put on edge in that way. I get the sense, though, that the American public is sick of what these political parties do and the way these political parties function. And they come across more as a cult that is a fundraising mechanism as opposed to a body and a vehicle to get political objectives accomplished. As I pointed out, these are two ideally warring parties, and the war, if it was fought, the Democratic Party would raise the military, the Republican Party would raise the military, the winner would decide on what happens. They've devolved this into a political space. But the American public sees this not as devolved militaries trying to get something accomplished politically. They see them as fundraising mechanisms that take a bunch of money and don't get anything done. And the African Americans I talk to, the people who I talk to when they're talking about political parties are sick of them. I've had so many people who are African American that decided not to vote for Democrats because they thought they're either taking advantage or they're not doing and representing what they say they are. When, what's his name, was on The View, and he pointed out, that is what you say, that is not what you do. That is frustration. And so when somebody points out, why are we talking about Democrats? That is frustration. I recognize it. I feel it. But you must understand, I'm stuck with having conversations on the major political parties in the United States, just like I have conversations about what is taking place in politics abroad. All of them are about politics. The issue has more to do with the fact that they don't represent what they say they represent, and that they don't do what they claim to represent and push for, in which case, I would argue, which is the reason why they lose. And they haven't gotten the hint. So people who are pissed off at them, even elements of their own party at this point, every right to be so, and every right to be pissed off. All of the criticism against them, I can say all, much of it, is perfectly valid. And if you're bitching at me for covering it because you are pissed off that they don't do what they say they do, they are not representative of this coalition that wants to get things accomplished and move the ball forward on issues of healthcare or education or unemployment or minimum wage. You're right to be pissed off. You're right to be. I'm annoyed by it myself. But I'm stuck in a position of, I don't know what to do with that. I don't know what to do with Sanders, meaning what's beyond Sanders. I don't know what to do with the idea of coming up with a political coalition in the United States to move the ball forward, because the way people frame it is Democratic Party and getting things accomplished in the context of a political system that I don't really think they can get anything accomplished in with a political party as broken and damaged in the way that the Democratic Party is. I feel where you're coming from. I just don't know how to change it. Feel where you're coming from. I just don't know what to do about it. Wanda USA, Jamal and Savvy give us validation. We aren't insane. You are not insane. The world is upside down for real. Yes, but it makes sense why. If you have a political system where you end up with two parties, you don't even have a parliament. Both political parties can take ungodly amounts of money. Okay, then right off the bat, you have a skew in your political system that is biased towards financial interests and money, regardless of what they say, because they have to say things to get people to vote for them. All right, but understand, behind the scenes, there is somebody who's putting $1 in their G-string, and that dollar in the G-string comes with entanglements. And those entanglements are going to be oriented towards cash, since that's the thing that those people want. How do we keep our wealth? How do we make inroads and gains even further in regards to putting more money in our pockets? And so whether you're giving that money to a Democrat or Republican, it is still a millionaire or billionaire who's giving that money to the Democrat and Republican. They have things that they expect for the money that they're given. How do you get substantial political movement in the sense of economic populism in a system where it's the rich that are funding the system? How do you do that? And yeah, you were able to do that for a while with the FDR, but I think, as we're saying, FDR was a fluke. It wasn't what the political party was going to be. And given over time, as more and more money gets put into the political system, you've seen how weak and useless and pointless the Democratic Party has fundamentally become, being trapped in that system. There's a contradiction at play. You have a political system or a political party that claims to represent the interests of workers, the left, the everyman, and yet it's not the everyman that is dumping the money into their pockets. It's a contradiction in terms. When you go and say, I want to get Medicare for all, and the rich person says, I don't care about that, I have health care. I want to increase the minimum wage. Well, I don't care about that. I fund workers. I don't want to pay them more money. Okay, what do you do about that? How do you get around that? Oh, I know. Identity. We need to talk about blacks and Latinx, a term that Hispanics don't even like. We need to talk about immigration. We need to talk about these other issues because these are issues that don't necessarily cost anybody anything in terms of money. I'm saying when you have a political system that's based around that, your ability to get something accomplished becomes nil, which is the Democratic Party right now. You can't get anything accomplished in the context of the party. I'm glad Sabrina brought up Justice Democrats. For everybody screaming, oh, we need a lefty Tea Party, because the Tea Party was able to get into the political space and be able to get their people in, which is ultimately, I think, what Trump ended up being. Justice Democrats was supposed to be that. We're boarding the ship, as they were saying. We're boarding the ship. We're taking over the ship. And instead of getting somebody boarding the ship and taking over the ship, you got those people bent into form where they wouldn't even argue for $15 an hour when this is a mainstay of lefty politics. I feel your pain. I feel your frustration. I just don't know how to fix it. So I bitch about it. That sounds horrible, but it's true. It sounds horrible, but it's true. All right, I'm going to end this. Let's see if the audience is bitching at me about it. Bernie Sanders is null and void at this point. Political history, studio, yeah. Skeptical jerk. You got to be harsh and stop sugarcoating everything. I don't think I'm sugarcoating it. I think I'm telling you exactly my thoughts. Citizen United is killing off U.S. democratic corporations and oligarchs get represented and run government. Saying 4K, agreed. Cherie, one more time. The wretched earth, black skin, white mask, Franz Omar Farron. Fair enough. Giovanni Gentle, the FDR, America, and the extensive Communist Party. Well, that was the thing, right? The Communist Party was able to push FDR on that stuff. We don't have a Communist Party today. This is the thing about Jimmy Dore. Love him or hate him, it's the extremes that keeps the middle in check. And depending on what those extremes are, it's going to be some determination where your middle is. Dore's not enough. He's one podcast. But you need that in a political space. Like, you need a Malcolm X to keep Martin Luther King in check. It scares the hell out of people where they say, okay, Martin Luther King's more palatable. We'll go with Martin Luther King. They're required. Otherwise, you get what you got now, a political system that's not worth a damn, that gets nothing accomplished, with people like Jeffries and Schumer being the leaders of that political party. And 29% of the American public are the only ones that approve of the political space. Just depressing, I know. I'm going to end this. I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, I'm going to say subscribe. Garland and I will be on this evening. I'm at 4 p.m. So definitely be around there. Check us out for that. We're going to be on both channels. People seem to love that show. So we are going to do more of that show because people love it. I look at the comments on it and they're through the moon. Shout out to George Galloway for having me on. Garland ran the show, but I was on Galloway's show yesterday. I thought it went well. Hopefully he'll have me back. I love Galloway. Man, there have been times where I've binge watched like hours of Galloway doing interviews. He is fascinating. Garland was the one who was covering the show that day, but still, I think it was a good spot. I want to tell all of you, thank you. You can support this channel, this show. It is often demonetized for the topics that we cover, but through PayPal, Patreon, Super Chats, membership, all of those things are helpful. As people say, buy me a cup of coffee. It is deeply appreciated. And you all have a fantastic evening. And I'll see you bright and early tomorrow morning. But again, I'll see you this evening at 4 p.m. also. But for this show, I'll see you bright and early, 7 a.m., 10 a.m. We're going to have a damn good show for you tomorrow. Also, Jamal Thomas Morning Show. 115 episodes in the record books. We have blown through 43,000 subs. We are on our way to 50K. I'm trying to think of something to do for 50K. So definitely put in the comments. That's assuming you got this far of what we can do that you guys may like for the 50K extravaganza show. You guys have a phenomenal day. Signing off. Have a good one all. Be safe.